So, welcome back to Shaping the City. We are soon about to start the third and final panel of this fourth edition of the forum. But before that, we like to share more about what we do in Venice, since Shaping the City is the part of the public program of our Architecture Biennial exhibition, Time Space Existence, that runs in Venice every second year in parallel to La Biennale di Venezia, and that the European Cultural Center organizes since 2012. So now we're going to watch a brief video about what is exhibited now in Venice, and it's going to be there until November 26th.
Every 2 years, the world stops and says, how are we projecting the future of our profession and its relationship to the world? We're trying to present the laboratory future of urbanism, but also the kind of work that we are doing on cities, data and design, community engagement and experts, as being experiments towards a better future of cities.
Housing is much more than the obvious. It can play different kinds of roles. We picked a problem that actually helped define a typology that we could use many places.
I thought architecture had to have more color, more vibration. I was very interested in architecture always, but after World War II, it became very boring. I discovered Solomonic columns and arches and domes. My work is making fun of architecture, especially of old architecture. Before, nobody would have built this. Now maybe they would build it.
We created an installation that we call Counterbalance that is essentially what we think of as a collective furnishing. We wanted something that people were immediately drawn to and that they wanted to touch and that they wanted to interact with. And we were introduced by the ECC to the fabricators here in Italy. They helped us find a regional material. And that's something we're thinking about in all of our projects. Where are materials being sourced? How are they moving to get to the site? How do we emphasize minimizing waste?
The name of our exhibition is Essential Homes Research Project. It's aimed at starting the debate over temporality in settlements, in the case for humanitarian and other type of crises. We aim to provide a solution that is more permanent, more durable, that protects inhabitants with a low CO2 emissions with an affordable solution.
The Essential Homes Research Project is located at Giardini della Marinaresa. We have a room at Palazzo Mora in which we also depict the context. We research photographic representations of different approaches to essential homes. We have also supporting drawings, physical model samples of the material we've been using, and also big images of how can it be used for communities.
I think it's crucial that you imagine for who you are designing and for who you're making a home. We should also think much more in a collective way. It's not just a single home, it's also the collective of many homes together. I could learn a lot from other countries, how they do their affordable housing. Venice is extremely important where we meet. It's important to show it to the audience, to come up with ideas, to give politicians or developers ideas, give them inspiration. But it's also very much for the architecture community ourselves, that we inspire each other and that we learn from each other. So all come to Venice, to the European Cultural Center. There's an enormous amount of exhibitions and it gives you a lot of inspiration.
Biennales are a cross-section of the future. Venice is the primary place for architects to come together, to have discussions, debate, and deliberation.
It's really worthwhile, honestly, because a lot of smart people come here. People with nose in the whole world, they're here wanting to see the work. It's a place where people meet and enjoy each other.
So you had the chance. Many of you know about the exhibition. Some of you are exhibiting now or have been exhibiting in the past, but I hope that for those that don't know about it, they might be curious about it, and we are here to answer all your questions later on. So now we proceed with the program. So I leave it to Adi to introduce the next speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia. So we're back in our program today. After time-space existence, we're back to New Orleans. Actually, we're here with two partners from Lemay studio, Patricia and Audrey. To give you an overview, so Patricia Lussier, she's a landscape architect and associate at Lemay, has more than 20 years of experience in the development of public spaces. Designing to fulfill the functions of social engagement, Patricia brings a unique sensitivity that highlights the history of each space she creates. Her distinctive approach has led to many multidisciplinary projects and competitions in urban design, landscape architecture, and resulted in awards of excellence. Our second speaker is Audrey Girard. As a pioneer in her field, Audrey seeks to integrate sustainable development principles and heritage enhancements into development projects in a simple, efficient, and creative manner, combining sensitivity and innovation. She leads the planning and design of large-scale projects and responsible for major development projects for institutional, private, and municipal clients. She specializes in environmental design and landscape environments and brings a multi-scalar and transdisciplinary approach to her work. Audrey and Patricia, thank you so much, and thank you so much for bringing the Canadian example about extreme weather events from Canada to the conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. We're so glad to be here with you guys and share our experience. It's definitely a different perspective. It's colder. It's definitely harsher in some aspects, but we don't have as much flood. So you are guys having a crazy amounts of challenges ahead, but we all do. We all share the commonalities of climate change. So I think every answers that we've seen today, all the conversations are very rich, and hopefully our perspective is enriching the conversation. So our case study is Montreal. It's our hometown. We're a private firm, but we do bridge. We do work elsewhere, but we today will concentrate on our hometown. It's the city we love, and hopefully the projects that we'll gather today will inspire some of your practice, some of your inspiration. Yes. The yellow. Okay, thank you. So in terms of, we have commonalities, but obviously we have some differences. So we are not along a shore, unfortunately. We're not known for ocean shores, but we are a continental, humid city, and we do experience very extreme weather, and more frequently in the last decade. So Montreal is an island. It's surrounded by water. And it's 4.3 million inhabitants in the region, so it's a pretty important city in Canada. It's a center of economy, but it's also a very vibrant and cultural hub for Francophone-speaking folks in America. So we like to think that we're the most European, North American city, so maybe some parallels with New Orleans. So 4 seasons. Summer, of course, and winter being the most extreme. So we have crazy amounts of heat and also crazy amounts of snow and cold weather. So we go and have those experiences full on during a single year. We've experienced the wildfires recently in the summer, so you've all experienced actually on the coast the impact of the smog in all of our cities coming from up north. We have crazy winds, floods as well, and ice storms. So some of the examples: heat wave in the summer, wildfires, smugs, snow frost. The impact on our infrastructure is massive. For the amount of snow, it's just precipitation on all forms, and one after the other, and a lot more and more frequent. And this is some challenges. So you see some Scandinavian country talking about the winter, but I think this is another level. You can't access outside. People are just stuck at home. It's intense, it's harsh, but it's in our DNA, and that's our commonalities. So spring flooding, Recently, we had very harsh winds. So unfortunately, when those weather goes from one to the other, in between, there's amounts of wind and kind of like transitions that are getting harsher and more frequent as well. So they bring their challenges as well.
Is this working? So hi everyone, very happy to be here. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on Lemay because this is where we work, Audrey and I, for the past 15 years. So Lemay is the 350 people or talent that we call them firm. We're based in Montreal. Most of the people that work at Lemay are in Montreal, and we also have offices in Toronto, Calgary, and New York. And one project at a time, we intervene through our city. So this is just an example of how we intervene. So with architecture and landscape architecture and urban design, how we sort of conquer the public realm, how we conquer each parks and the edge of the city, also along St. Lawrence River, and try to implement the city in a more resilient way. So we have 3 pillars at Lemay. So as I just spoke about the fact that we are a transdisciplinary team, so that is very important, how we tackle the projects all together with different professions and different knowledge of what the city could become. And also the design excellence pillar, that is very important for us because we do want to be iconic. We do want to create iconic architecture and landscape, but most and for all, we need to sort of integrate within the heritage and properly on each side and have proper integration just to make sure that we do talk about, you know, the nature of the sites. We do talk about the reality of it and the heritage and the culture. And this is what makes the success of a project. But and also the net positive. So we always integrate that into each and every one of our projects and adding the multi-layer of co-benefits that could also be incorporated into each of the projects. So how can design help mitigate the effect of climate change? So that is a big question. I was so naive when I first started studying landscape architecture. Little did I know the impact that I was going to have on design, on my projects, and now it's just becoming a reality that we need to implement to each and every one of our projects. Otherwise, we're just, you know, designing for the beauty of it. We're not designing for, you know, for a purpose. So this is how we sort of develop each and every one of our projects. So we approach, of course, every site has to be flexible. We need to have flexibility. It has to be positive impact on the city, and we need to do more with less. So, you know, we get projects, the clients have needs, but it's up to us to do more with less. We need to add multiple layers so that it creates co-benefits. We need to push every client further and make them realize how far this project could be, how better it could become, and how we could actually altogether improve the resilience of our cities. So we're going to just touch on 3 design lenses, presenting projects, examples that we are, you know, proud of and that maybe could help mitigate the project and give ideas. So the reactivation, of course, we need to think about the people that live in this city. We need to make sure that each space that is developed, each space, the public realm, has to be accessible and bring health and well-being. Biodiversification, so everyone's been talking about that, but that's very dear to me, and bringing wilderness back in our city to just be positive for the biodiversity, so just talk about life itself. And restoration, how, you know, from the ground, you know, from the earth, how can we actually improve and make that emerge from each project? So we'll start with the reactivation with a few projects, and as I was mentioning, it's really about the people. It's how the people use the space, you know, have access to it, and really activate all the different areas of the city. So if we go to like that first image, a very proud mayor in the 60s, very proud of having erected this very important infrastructure for cars, based on cars. So all the cities, industrialist cities of the world were actually, added with concrete and asphalt, not permeable at all. So that is one aspect that our mayor right now is very keen on, and we are part of the C40 cities. So we do have initiatives that we need to push forward and implement in our city. Just a few days ago, she was talking about these sponge gardens and projects that are going to be coming in Montreal, the sponge sidewalks, and making the city more permeable, and making sure that the water from our crazy precipitation that Audrey was talking about are actually percolating and not creating floods. So this is the Bonaventure project that we did, and of course just removing the cars altogether created a linear park and making sure that it became at a human scale. The cars were moved away and reduced, and it just created a space for families and children to play, and trying to positively change the aspect of the city. And promoters are now, interested in building residential towers in that area to, continue promoting the health and well-being and activation of our city. Okay, so Place des Montréalaises is a project that is very dear to me. It's an international design competition that we won, and it not only transforms a portion of the city, but it addresses the importance of women in our culture and the builders of our city. And we are going to talk about social justice a little bit later on, but this is a project that does that as well as it does implement with biodiversity. So we planted a meadow of 21 flowers honoring 21 women that were selected for the project. So as you see, it's a little bit further down that first project that presented. And so this is in the 70s where there was this big highway separating the city that was created. And you see a metro station just at the bottom, left side. So that is a metro station that had just been built next to a highway. So you have like a bunch of people emerging from the metro, and they don't know how to sort of cross that highway because it's, being built. So that was a reality, and Place des Montréalaises, what it does, it sort of reunites these two portions of the city, making the cars disappear, bringing biodiversity back in the city, forest area, and gathering spaces. And together with art, architecture, landscape architecture. You can go to the next one, please. Yeah, so with art, we created a wooded area, a meadow, and added inclusivity in the space to talk about the women of the city, but also security, bringing back the users in a secure way, hiding the cars. So again, for that project, having the seasons always in mind. So for the plant selection, we need to be careful so that they sustain the weather, they sustain the precipitation, they sustain the changing climate. So we have to go through a very extensive palette of vegetation just to make sure that it can evolve, it can be resilient, and it can actually sustain this crazy weather that we have. So this is just an image overlooking, it's becoming a belvedere to the city, and it's under construction right now. So we are going to see it emerge, hopefully in 2025.
So at another scale, we have also a crisis that is more linked to the most of cities right now. It's the fact that we need to have homes for a lot more people, and they need to stay accessible. So this piece of land is the whole horse race in Montreal. It's owned by the city for quite a while, and it's been going into a lot of consultation for the future of this piece of land. It's one of the only city-owned large space that's left within the city. So there's a lot of pressure to bring the community, involve it in a conversation about the future of a neighborhood. So the mayor wants it to be the first carbon-neutral neighborhood in Montreal, Just so you know, she has high expectations. So our mayor wants Montreal to be carbon neutral for 2050. So no pressure here. So for about a bit more than 12,000 units, how to fit everybody in a dense environment that brings another way of life. It's denser than what Montrealers are used to. How to, keep the greenery, keep its ecological capacity, building for the future, making sure the way of living that we're proposing with the community is answering the needs. Because when we're talking about carbon neutrality, we're not only talking about the carbon that's embedded in the built form, but it's also how people will live, how they will transport, how they will consume, and so on. So we first started by the landscape. Obviously, there's this identity, this central park that's needed. Everybody wanted it. The scale of it was a big discussion. There was people scared for too big of a park just in terms of security, because the neighborhoods around is very diverse. It has some challenges. But this central plaza place park was really important. The green belt, the green corridor, some different intervention in terms of water retention. It's not a place that's necessarily going to be flooded. It's pretty high from the lands, but it still has to manage its own water. So how do we integrate that in all of our streets and all of the parks and so on? And one of the main things that I wanted to touch, it's about the needs of the people. And that's one of the big discussions that we had, how carbon neutrality can rethink about the infrastructure for the community. So around health, around education, around recreational sports facilities. It's not to necessarily have each actor having their own infrastructure, but how to build them together. So we had a lot of thoughts about the notion of hubs for elderly, combined with schools, combined with some mobility hubs, and so forth. So the whole plan is basically drawn around the parks and around those future ecosystem of communities, and that includes carbon neutrality and urban agriculture and so forth. So this was big and very interesting discussions we had with the community for the plan. In terms of build form, it's a challenge for the climate. We need to address the north, the south, the warmth and the cold at the same time. So thinking about diversity of typologies, diversity of ownership, and also the notion of energy, of course.
Yeah, so I just want to talk about biodiversification of our city. I did a presentation last summer for a congress and for the landscape architect, and talking about bringing wilderness back into the city. So it has to be drastic. We have to talk about microforests. We have to talk about diversified biodiversity. Last year there was a COP15 event that took place in Montreal, and it's gathering Canadians, researchers, Canadian biologists and designers all together in the city to talk about the drop of biodiversity that we foresee for the future if things are not changing. So we need, there was an agreement to bend the curve and to bring it up. So we need to intervene. We need, if medium intervention, will manage, but it needs to be drastic. It needs to be addressed. We need to talk about, these climate that are increasing, and bending the curve is one of the solutions, and bringing wilderness back into the city. So this project that Audrey's going to talk about does
so the
address
city
that.
does a lot. There's bio corridors getting set up, but we wanted to touch point on hyper nature because it's the research-based project that we've done with the firm, and it's about wilderness really in the city center, like in really arid environment. So how can we bring microforests to harsh environment where the human is also in need of a lot of things? So how do we combine those needs in an ecosystemic way? How do we also manage water? So when we were saying doing more with less, it's basically this. We're really constrained in the space that we use, but we need to function and have many use for one specific space. So Hypernature was actually thinking about a cultural hub for Montreal, so it had to be functional and bring some certain amount of culture, servicing, and so forth. But it was also about putting the user at another level, maybe creating those experiences that's separating the nature in a way, protecting it because it's overused, and bringing all the co-beneficial that we can see for wilderness in the city. So reducing the stress, obviously the temperature. Losing the noise and so forth. So how to make the human integrated with nature, but somewhat respecting also that there needs to be some distance and some very used area, and how the culture can also monitor and express whatever data that we need to gather from those spaces to know how they evolve, to know how the benefits are unfold, and maybe multiply them in the city. Belchas is actually an architecture-based project, so we haven't worked on it, but it's really a dear project to a firm because it's really a good example of how to bring the client further in his thoughts. So this project was calling for a garage for buses to repair and stuck buses, and we, through our process, our design process, bringing everybody together, transdisciplinary approach, we managed to make him do a bit more. So the city was just gonna build this garage, and it became like a landmark. It became a park over a garage. It became just this mitigating space that people will eventually be able to address. So the parking is basically underground. We dig the big hole, the loop, the buses are actually going underground, bringing the light down, and the whole roof is green, and it's overlooking eventually the city, so it's in construction right now as well. Another example, last of all, large-scale project, but touching a bit the water. So we're a post-industrial city. We have those areas of the city that used to be industrial that are left unused, very contaminated, with a lot of challenges in terms of bringing people to live there and appreciate the shores. So we were in an island, but this is a great example of how not of an island we sometimes feel, a bit like New York and so forth. We're not always making the best of our shores. So this is a project that also brings people back to the city and really give the shores, the parks, and a new contact with the water. So this is really a step away from downtown, connected with the high train, and will eventually, hopefully, be another way to experience the underused industrial land. So a bit about how we think this space could be used also in the winter, so how we think about wind conditions and so forth is always present in the project.
So I guess from the previous presentation that we've been hearing throughout the day, talking about flood, talking about shoreline, and this increasing of water, I guess we need to sort of take example from that, because we haven't really been living that situation. So the shoreline for us means something else than what we've been hearing this morning. So for example, the city is really oriented towards itself and not towards the outside. So we often forget that we are an island, and we also have some benefits from it. We could benefit from it, and how we intervene throughout the shoreline. So Audrey's example was presenting somewhat the end of the Lachine Canal in the more urban and city center. And this is the same canal that was built in the industrial era for the transportation to be able to come into the city and deliver. So the space was then being transformed for a marina and a linear park, but never were the shoreline actually touched on, and they were being eroded with the current, they were being eroded with the ice. So we are now starting to work on this project where we need to have a reflection on how we conceptualize and design our shoreline, and it cannot just be like rocks and something really sterile. It also has to talk about integration of ecosystems and habitat, and to do some mitigation and to do some compensation of the destruction that we have been doing. So this is just a quick section of the example, how we're sort of pushing back the appropriable spaces where people can actually walk and explore the shoreline, and using a big portion of it to rehabilitate and to bring back some ecosystems along the shoreline, and to make sure that our shore is not being eroded as much. And of course, always thinking of the rising of the water, because it does happen during the change of the season. This last project that we are going to talk about does relate to Earth a lot, and it's an immense site on the north of the city, and it used to be a quarry that was left, there was a big hole left after the quarry was done, harvesting the rock. And so what a perfect hole just to create a landfill. So that everything that all the the domestic trash was actually transported into this hole to create a landfill, and now is being transformed and covered up to create a park. So the landfill is underneath. It's creating biogas. It's moving. It's creating energy. So we're harvesting that energy into these spheres. They're capturing and monitoring the biogas, and the biogas is being harvested to create electricity for the surrounding areas. So that's a good use of what's happening underneath, and the space is becoming a really important destination for all Montrealers with active mobility, cyclist path. During winter, it's being used also for cross-country skiing, and the spheres are about monitoring the biogas, but it's also educating and becoming an interactive object for the users. So transforming that gray space into a potential green space is something that is also important in the new landscape of Montreal.
Yeah, and just the touch point and maybe do a bridge with the conversation later. It's really taking place in a part of the city that's actually one of the most social diverse and poorly in terms of income. So it's really recalibrating also access to parks and facilities for our city.
Yeah, so that's the end of our presentation, and I hope you just liked it. We have some questions. If you have some questions, we're here to answer.
Hi, I have a question, of course. Going back to the first one about the upcycled landscape and this, go to the last one you did called the Frederick Park? Yes. Okay, so this is fascinating. How did this all happen? And you may not know this answer, but how did this happen governmentally wise? How did this come to be? Because this is brilliant, right? It's smart. And I'm really completely curious about this one, and then I wanted to ask you about the 21 women as well. It's like, who are these 21 women, and how did this happen? And can we meet them? But can you tell me a little bit more about how you were able, or how Lemay was able to interface with the government to get them on board, how this entire process happened, because this is great.
So this project has been going on for 20 years now. So it's actually a city-owned land, and the most of the work, the thinking behind it, was done by the city. So there are some landscape architects and thinkers in the city itself. So they were foreseeing, thinking ahead, what will this landfill become in the long run? And from 20 years ago, I know landscape architects that have been working on this project at the city, and anticipating the transformation of the landfill. So they have been, studying, making, tests from how the landfill was transforming, because that was the issue. As soon as portions of it were filled, they were, top it off with the earth, and everything was still moving because of the biogas, because it's there's something happening underneath. So it's a very flexible, soft land that moves. So everything that we do on top of it needs to be malleable, needs to be flexible. So this is the end of something that has been going on for like 20 years. So, little by little, this landfill was actually covered up. So increasing every year or every 5 years, the portion that was appropriable for the people to use as a park. So now it's even last year, I think there was some transformation again, and even there's a lot of cultural buildings and organizations that have been sort of starting to use the perimeter of the site. And
yeah, I mean, they were still using it for compost now, so it's still like a place that's useful for the city. And like she was saying, there's the sport facilities and all the investment that the city could do elsewhere have been kind of colliding around that park. So the whole perimeter of the site is really community based. It has a circus of Cirque du Soleil, l'école de cirque, which you probably know. So it's there's part of it that are private but have a community-oriented program, and there's a soccer facility. There's a
There's a big recycling infrastructure as well.
Yeah.
All the the recycled material harvested from the city is being collected there as well.
So I'm gonna go back to the woman and the 21 women of Montreal. There's more than 21 women in Montreal. I guarantee. That's your project, so you talk about.
Who are the 21 women and how did this come to be?
Okay, I'm sad to say you cannot meet them.
No, that's okay.
Because they have passed away. So it goes, so there was a committee that was founded in Montreal, and it's called the Comité des Montréalaises. And it's a bunch of women that, gather together for multiple reasons, to talk about the future of women, to talk about how women are represented in the city. And they selected the 21 women. So it goes from the co-founder of Montreal, which is Jeanne Mance, and honoring these important business women, women that had an impact on the Black community, women that played hockey for the first time, and that put in place the first all-female hockey team. So these are the women that we are recognizing. At the same time, we're also honoring the 14 Polytechnique victims that were killed during a shooting in Montreal in 1989. So it's each woman that are honored have a different background, have a different finality to their life or contribution, but they were all positioned into. I think you could go to the picture of So you see the circular structure was created to have all these names positioned in that mirror of commemoration, so you can see yourself and you can see the name of the women, and you sort of feel, in sync with those women.
Wonderful, wonderful projects. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey and Patricia. Really appreciate that. And just one comment from my side. It was very interesting to see during all the presentation that we saw today. We saw renders of water over the cities. So it was very nice to see a different aspect of ice and snow and being a multi-use space with an extreme kind of condition. I'm just gonna jump to the next panel, our third and last panel of Shaping the City, which is titled Environmental Justice and Climate Change. So, after Hurricane Katrina, climate justice issues were brought to the forefront of public policy discussions. Now, Martin today, he presented us with some alarming statistics, so I'm just going to add one more. So, the World Bank estimates that climate change would displace more than 140 million people within their home countries in Africa, in South Asia, and Latin America by 2050. And that's huge. So this panel in particular delves and speaks about the vulnerable populations, the low-income communities, minority groups, people with disabilities that may be at higher risk for climate-related damage. It will focus on strategies that encompass and highlight issues related to social inclusion, spatial justice, development, and equal opportunities for an equitable, healthy future for all. Now, we're very much looking forward to this panel since yesterday, and we would like to invite Simone Domingue, who is an assistant professor at Tulane, in particular Tulane ByWater Institute, to be our moderator for this panel. So Simone is a hazards and disaster researcher and social scientist concerned about the environmental injustices, particularly those related to climate change. Her past research has critically analyzed disaster resilience initiatives and federal disaster policy and argues that these measures reproduce social inequities. Currently, she's part of the team of researchers measuring and evaluating climate adaptation capacity in small cities. They are interested in adaptation and connections in justice and justice. So this is the project that has been funded by the National Academics Gulf Research Program. Simone, thank you so much. The floor is yours. Yeah, thank you.
I will use the mic, and this, does this advance the slides? Oh. Okay, well, I will probably not go through all of my slides because I realize they're not very aesthetically nice. I forgot exactly that I was coming to a design conference, so just, you know, a thing for me to remember. But I wanted to start with a definition of environmental justice. And environmental justice is really rooted in a social movement. And that social movement, and also to say that a lot of my perspective is coming from the United States and my work in southern Louisiana and a few other areas, the Gulf Coast. So I'm really very excited to engage with folks that can speak from the international context, and I really am looking forward to the panel discussion. But just to say that this is really grounded in a US perspective, but the environmental justice movement was really a reaction to the mainstream environmental movement, the conservationist and preservationist mentalities that really didn't see the environment as including the places where people live and work, and was not inclusive and could even be argued as rooted in dispossession of indigenous people and racism towards people of color. So an environmental justice perspective focuses on reparations and redress for communities that have been marginalized, and recognizes that these communities themselves are resilient and engage in activism and direct democracy to advocate for safe and healthy environments. I am pressing the yellow. I'm not sure why it's not working. But I will go on. So in terms of environmental justice has really been associated with the placement of polluting facilities, hazardous waste sites, but climate change is adding an additional layer of risk in terms of the severe weather that will bring, okay, thank you. And so this is creating a really uncertain environment for many communities. And unfortunately, if we don't proactively think about social justice or equity, then the solutions that we advance have the potential to reproduce inequalities. And this is something that has been discussed by scholars in terms of sustainability, in terms of resilience, and now climate adaptation, trying to raise these critical questions of who is this for, who is this benefiting? And so one thing that scholars of justice like to do is think about different dimensions, political dimensions of the term justice. And these are all interconnected, of course, but one way to think a little bit about how they differ is thinking about distributive justice in terms of the material placement of harms and risks that's grounded in really a Rawlsian theory of justice. Another way of thinking about justice is procedural and participatory, meaning addressing individuals' ability to participate and be citizens in political and institutional processes. And then recognitional justice, which addresses issue of status and status harm, and how marginalization is encoded into institutions. And so in terms of adaptation, we can think about ways in which these dimensions of justice may play out and produce injustices. So for distributive justice, this might look like flood protection infrastructure that's prioritized in white affluent areas, relocation as the mechanism that's target for less wealthy areas or people of color, green gentrification bringing displacement. In terms of participatory justice, we might see that the processes, the planning processes are structured in ways that favor privileged groups, including the language, time requirements, all the things that are required for participating. In terms of recognitional justice, we might think about how the historical legacies of redlining, for those maybe not familiar with that term, in the US that means the history of how the government directed investment away from communities of color. Dispossession, political disenfranchisement are erased if we don't recognize them. And so I want to talk a little bit about coastal Louisiana, to also focus a little bit outside of the protected levee systems. I have done some work with communities along the coastal zone. It's, of course, the reasons for land loss are complex. They have to do with the leveeing of the Mississippi River. They have to do with sea level rise. They also have to do with the impacts from energy development. And I want to draw attention to how the coast is a racially, ethnically, and culturally diverse place. There are Native American, Black, Southeast Asian, Hispanic, and Cajun or French Canadian folks all along the Gulf Coast. And a lot of these folks, the history of their settlement can be traced back to rather traumatic dysphoria or violence that they have, that history of within their heritage. Here are some folks. These are folks from indigenous communities, and these tribes are also face the additional challenge of not being recognized by the federal government, which adds some capacity constraints in terms of their ability to adapt to climate change. And the challenges are really complex, of course, even with the many great adaptation projects in place. Even if those are successful and all of them are funded and completed, there's still going to be risk associated with climate change. There's still going to be land loss. Community, their individuals, families, their options for relocation are very limited. There are big structural constraints, constraints stemming from the real estate market in terms of people don't have good options for places to relocate to have money to be able to relocate. Of course, property values are going down in many coastal communities and flood insurance is going up, so people are really constrained. And this really also constrains resilience because for so many coastal communities, their resilience comes in the form of the ties that they have and the social supports that they have. And of course, they're also extremely culturally tied to the land. There are also challenges and criticisms of large-scale infrastructure projects. So this is something that many coastal communities are concerned about in terms of the impacts that they will have on habitat, on fishing grounds, and increased flood risk in downstream communities. And for many folks, they are tired of being resilient. They feel as though they are being called upon to be resilient, and they are struggling to cope with that. And I found from my research where I talked to people in community, but I also talked to institutional actors, that members of communities, particular people outside of levee systems, could be framed as irrational or not understanding the risks, but I found many narratives that countered that assumption. Instead, what I found is that people wanted to be recognized for the value and knowledge that they have, recognized as participants within adaptation processes, and also for some folks like Donna, which is a pseudonym, but she's a tribal leader and elder. She grounded her concerns in a very multi-species concept of justice, and also in a philosophy of doing no harm to anyone. And she said that it all boils down to love. Really, if what you're doing does not have love for everyone, and that is all of our relations, that's the plants, the animals, the people, if you're going to impact those, then you really should not be doing it. There are other ways to restore the coast based on our traditional knowledge that could actively work and end up having little to no negative impact whatsoever, and that's definitely because of the way that we function as a people. You bring harm to none. I also want to highlight this statement from a community member that really highlights how he was grasping with the fragility of his community. He said that the reality of our situation here is that, honestly, we probably have about 2 more generations of people that can live in the coastal areas, and that's really heartbreaking to come to terms with that. And there are some people who have and some who have not and won't. But I think more and more people understand that we have gone through past to the turning point, past the place where we can fix it. We are not fixing it. It is about living here as successfully as we can for as long as we can and embracing the fact that that will not be forever. And there's something beautiful about that. It's like the difference between getting live flowers and plastic flowers for your birthday or Valentine's or something. You sort of treasure those flowers and how beautiful and fragile and delicate they are, where the plastic flowers might go in a box and collect dust somewhere and end up in a garage sale. But I think that coming to that mindset of cherish it because it's beautiful and will go away and celebrate that. So I'm gonna end there. I'm also have ideas as a researcher in terms of how we can be moving conversations about equity forward in terms of integrating equity metrics into capital improvement planning, exploring alternative pathways for cost-benefit analysis, or alternatives to cost-benefit analysis altogether in terms of how to prioritize infrastructure, thinking about how to have more democratic and inclusive participatory planning, and also protecting local knowledge, integrating that, and cultural viewpoints into adaptation or resilience planning. So I am really excited to hear from all of the panelists and guide the discussion. So I will end right there.
Thank you, Simone, for kicking off the last panel of the forum. Now I'm happy to introduce the first panelist who is going to be part of this discussion, Sarah Williams. Sarah Williams is an associate professor of technology and urban planning at the MIT, where she's also director of the Civic Data Design Lab and the Leventhal Center for Advanced Urbanism. Sarah combines her training in computation and design to create communication strategy that expose urban policy issues to broad audiences and creative civic change. So, welcome, Sarah.
The clicker is there. Is this it? Okay. Hi, everyone. First, I want to thank so much the ECC for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here today. And really already enjoying New Orleans. People are so friendly on the way over here. So let's just make sure this clicker works. The yellow one. Okay, I was not clicking the brightly colored button. So I am director of the Civic Data Design Lab, but I'm also director of the Leventhal Center for Advanced Urbanism. The Leventhal Center for Advanced Urbanism is a cross-disciplinary research center for architects, urban planners, media artists, data scientists, and it's the idea that it's through this interdisciplinary work that we can really create advancements in cities. So one of the things that we're really interested in the Leventhal Center is making long-term partnerships with cities to work on some of the biggest things that they struggle with. I myself am very disciplinary. I'm a geographer, I'm an architect, an urban planner, and a data scientist, and I mash up all these skills to create communication strategies with data that I hope to use for policy change. So I call this work data action, using data for a public good, is something I talk about in my most recent book. But today I'm going to talk about two projects that I've been working on related to migration. The first one is called Distance Unknown. And this project started through a collaboration that I had with a colleague at the World Food Program and the Migration Policy Institute. And it starts with this premise, which we just heard Hadi talk about, right? That between 25 million and 1 billion people are expected to move because of the changing climate. And some would estimate that this is a low estimate because just in 2020, 30 million people were displaced due to climate-related disasters. And so through a conversation of my partners in the World Food Program and the Migration Policy Institute, we wanted to specifically understand this, what was happening in Central America countries, in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And for many of you in the US, you know that right now we have a lot of migrants coming in from this country. New York and Boston, which are sanctuary cities, are receiving exponential amounts of migrants daily, and also Chicago and LA. But in this project, what we wanted to know is what is motivating them, why are they migrating, and kind of try to get at the core reasons for these migrations. So we interviewed 5,000 households in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. We interviewed people from regions where migrants are being sent back to. So we had information about where they were in the US and the town or municipality. We didn't have their exact location, but those regions in which, and that's where the surveys took place. And together with the World Food Program and the Migration Policy Institute, we generated a report, the kind of report that you would, you probably have seen before, and we were super excited about some of the insights in this report. But I also turned over and I looked at my colleague's table, and there were stacks of reports that I thought nobody had ever read before. And so we were going to have a congressional hearing, and I thought, what if we create a different way to present this data to Congress? And we were still on Zoom back then, so this congressional hearing was Zoom, and we thought, what if we created some kind of link or interactive data visualization that they could play with during the congressional hearing? And in fact, the World Food Program took the leap of faith and allowed us to develop this interactive visualization. The visualization, and I'll explain some of the findings in the report through the visualization and the website right now, although there is, the report is close to 80 pages long, so I'm not gonna be able to go through all of them, but just give you some highlights. But in the visualization, we contextualize the work, the kind of issues of migration within violence, climate, food insecurity, and policy that has really driven the climate change and, driven the migration from Central America. And, you know, I think one thing that many people don't realize is kind of the historical context which has caused a lot of the migration from Central America, from both violence, wars, political unrest, as well as in more recent years, severe drought and hurricanes within the Central American region. So One of the things that we found is that, the sheer financial burden that migrants take on. So one of the shocking things that came out of this study is that we found that migrants in just 1 year from Central American countries spent $2.2 billion to migrate to the United States. Yet we in the US really benefit from these migrants, right? 73% of the US agricultural labor force are migrants. Yet the US Department of Homeland Security spends $2.9 billion to keep those same migrants out. So one of the things that my partners were really interested in was this just total complete loss of money, but rather positioning that loss of resources when we were talking to Congress to kind of pull on some of the kind of things that really get politicians at their heart. One of the things that we found is only 57% of migrants reside in their intended destination. So they're spending all of this money, but only really close to 60% make it. So that's a huge 40% of that money is lost. And one of the things that we found is that migrants send a lot of remittances, we all know that, to their home country. But in the study that we did, the money was going simply to provide basic needs. That means food on the table, shelter, and just educational services. Not, we often think about remittances as adding an extra room on our house or a kind of extra highway or getting extras, but in this case, it's really providing a social services for those countries. So kind of adding that food on the table. One of the things that we found is that really financial insecurity driven by these changes in climate as well as violence was really driving the migration. And so one of the things that we asked them is what was the motivation for migration from economics, reunification, security, climate. And I should say, in our study, we could have done a better job with the climate question, because when people say, when you ask somebody, did you migrate because of environmental factors, people are like, oh, no, I moved because I lost my job, but then they lost their job because the farm was in drought and so forth. So, next time we do this research, I think being able to dig deeper into that is going to be important. Ultimately, we made the recommendations in Congress to provide more legal pathways for Central American migrants. So if we go back to my statistic that 73% of the labor force is migrants, 93% of those are Mexican. So and in fact, the Mexican migrant labor force is aging out and very much need to create or allocate more visas for Central American migrants to help. And that is exactly what 33 senators did. And they wrote a letter to the Biden administration citing our findings in their report. Roughly 6 months later, Biden actually did advocate for this, creating more legal pathways, and now there is kind of movement in a bill in order to add or allocate more visas for Central American migrants. There's still a lot of work to do there, right? Connecting those migrants to the jobs and the workforce and kind of communicating that, but it's a great first step in allowing those migrants to make money, send that money back home. And one of the things that we did after the presentation was we actually asked congressmen and congressional aides and people that were at the hearing, what was it that allowed you to write that letter? Was it the report? What kind of or influences? And one of the things that they said is that by being able to interact with the visualizations, to slice and dice the data, to find their own insights in it, created a certain kind of trust in the information, but also allowed them to feel as though they were acquiring new knowledge. Of course, I was presenting that data to them through my own means, but I think one thing that's important about this is how can we create different kinds of ways to communicate issues that people feel that they are included in the process, and I think that's very much what happened here in order to influence these policy changes. So this is really how we take data to action, build expert teams, like our team included Migration Policy Institute, the World Food Program, other data scientists, architects, and planners, collect the data uniquely, quantify it also uniquely, and ground truth the results by asking people on the ground whether what we talked about rang true, and then opening that data up through visualizations. This actually has sound in it. Maybe I can pause it. Oh, wait, if I go back. Uh-oh. Maybe go back one.
Migrants annually spend $2.2 billion to migrate from Central American countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, traveling to the United States. Something that was important to us was to humanize the data. In Venezuela, their currency was very inflated, so a lot of people would take these inflated bills, which are seemingly worthless. They would fold them into things like purses or wallets or bags, and they would sell these for money. So we took this same weaving technique. We decided to represent the data into a tapestry.
The way we decided to work with someone to make the tapestry is by basically reaching out to migrant organizations. We ran into Casa Tochan, which is a shelter in Mexico City, a shelter for migrants. We decided to have migrants weaving the paper because, you know, they know the struggles.
I think what's great about the tapestry is in it is their data, but it's also built by them, and it represents their motivations to leave. So it really represents their hopes and dreams for the future.
We designed, custom designed 5 different bills. Each one of the bills has data from our survey and from our findings.
Economics, family reunification, quality of life, security, climate change. A lot of migrants explain that they have, economic reasons for migrating. When you scan one of these squares, the migrant's story will pop up on the screen, and you can explore the migrant's story, their motivations for migrating, and their cost.
The work of this tapestry was seen at the UN headquarters in Rome and had a big impact on the UN ambassadors. It created a dialogue around the needs of migrants, but it did it in such a way that people didn't feel backed into a corner. Art allows us to have a dialogue around important political issues that gets us out of our normal mode. After we did the congressional hearing, we really felt like we didn't have a way to have migrants be included in telling their story. I felt like we were presenting their data, but when you reduce like these incredible stories that they had to tell to a simple dot on a map or a data visualization, it felt like we were reducing like all of that data and not allowing us to connect with the empathetic parts of what migrants go through every day. So we decided to build that tapestry, as you saw in the video, through this money, thinking of the fact that $2.2 billion is spent by these migrants. This is a photo of us in front of the tapestry with the Panama ambassador, and this is the head of the World Food Program. And I think what's really important about this is that after seeing this exhibition in the World Food Program, he actually went along the Darien Gap and kind of did a Twitter campaign to try to bring attention to the migrants' causes, to talk about what was the reasons for that. But also, this tapestry was at the World Food Program Executive Board meeting, so that's when US, Canada, all the donor countries come at a time when things like issues of Ukraine and other were taking funding away from the migrants' experience. So one of the things that I think was really exciting about this was that it brought together, and here we see ambassadors from Panama and even Venezuela was here and had a conversation about, I mean, she was very defensive about her position, but also it allowed her to have that conversation with us about what she thought was going on and what we can do about the crisis. Ultimately, thank you, ECC, for presenting the tapestry in Venice this year. And so we're happy to have it there if you see it. One of the things that we did in this study is also look at the migrants along the Darien Gap. We had hotspots and asked migrants where they came from. And I think one of the things that was really shocking is that they come from 42 different countries. So from Colombia to Panama, that hardest part of the migration, people are represented from Afghanistan and as far away as West Africa. I'm going to talk really quickly about this next project. It was just released, but I think my time is up, so I'm not going to go too far into it. But once we did this project with the World Food Program, we've now done a lot of migration projects with them. The impact in kind of the donor and policy making for them has been huge. So we started to work recently with them and also the organization, International Organization of Migration and the Mixed Migration Council, so looking at migration from West Africa into Libya. So again, we interviewed over 2,000 migrants in Libya, where they came from and their passage and how they entered and got into Libya to understand the conditions that they had along the way. Again, kind of a traditional report that then we paired with this website. So what the website looks at is where all of the migrants were coming from, the routes theoretically that they took, and then we took one route and pulled it out to illustrate and highlight the risks along that route. So this route, which is going from Mali into Libya, has information about violence, smugglers, conflict areas, landscape remoteness, and then on the top, so the data in transect in the bottom is explaining that risk along the route, and then on the top, it's narrating the stories of the migrants as they go along that route. The risk map that we created from this was used by the World Food Program to send aid to the migrants, so kind of helping them along the pathway. And if you don't know, migrants in West Africa, it's even like the conditions after looking at Central America versus West Africa, the conditions are extremely hard. Smugglers often leave them for dead in the desert. There's so much conflict and death. So you can look at that data and then look at the conditions along with photos that we included in the website here. The risk map that you see, you can actually change the weights of the data. So what do you think is more risky to go through? And we hope that this website really tells the story of migration. So I don't think I have time to get into all of these risk layers, but happy to talk about it later. But each one of these were very detailed data set. We had reported violence from the Mixed Migration Council, which had violence along this route, conflict events from an ACLED data set, which is produced, understands conflict areas along each transect. We had food insecurity, and then we had data on how reliant a migrant was on a smuggler. Remoteness is also a risk, so how far away you are from an urban area might mean the ability to get water or get food, and then heat exposure. And these are just some images of these different kinds of risks along that route that were included in the website. As many of you know, once they get to Libya, they're often put in detention centers. European governments pay Libya to keep them from crossing the ocean. This is the data set that makes up the mapping and the ultimate transects that we created. So I think like what we hoped on in this study is really to give a different viewpoint and understanding of the experience. And this was just released last week, or sorry, a month ago. Not last week, it felt like last week, a month ago. And we hope to learn how it's also affected policy as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. So we move to the next presentation, and I'm happy to introduce you to Coleman Jordan. Coleman is a lecturer at Morgan State University School of Architecture and Planning. He is the principal of Studio Griots, an interdisciplinary research design practice, and co-founder of a not-for-profit organization called Corners. His projects focus on social justice and development in underrepresented communities in both domestic and international context. His research investigates the implications, past and present, of the spaces of the Black Atlantic, decolonizing the Black aesthetic, and architecture in the age of Pan-Africanism and its next generation. So I give it to the floor to Coleman. Welcome.
You have to excuse me for a second. I'm going to move some furniture around. Thank you. Okay, it's not because I'm lazy. It's because I've been up for the last, I don't know how many hours in the past. Some of you may know that, so first of all, my name is Coleman Jordan. I want to thank the ECC and Lussier and everyone for the invitation. But I am coming from Morgan State University, and as of Tuesday of this past week, we had a mass shooting at our university. And I've been teaching as well as talking to students and trying to negotiate with administrators as far as how we are going to move forward. So you won't see a lot of flash from my presentation, and you'll see more rustic type of a presentation, but that'll be okay. So starting there, the context that we're working with here that I'm looking at is really looking at the context of redlining, environmental justice, in African-American communities specifically. And one of the reasons that this actually became of interest to me with this conference in particular is because I work with a lot of students that are coming from, students and faculty that are coming from other countries. And when they come into this country, and even new generations of students here, they know nothing about why the African community or African-American community and or maybe some of the immigrant community, Native American communities are where they are located. It's not out of choice. It's not like we came here and said, okay, I think I'll live here with everyone else that, low income issues, poor schools and things of that nature. So I think it's important to actually begin to understand the larger implications of what this country really put in place. So I'm going to start with this quote, I think I'll read here. Space like language is socially constructed. Architecture thus defined as a record of deeds done by those who have the power to build. It is shaped by social, political, and economic forces and values embodied in the forms themselves, the processes through which they're built, and the manner in which they're used. Creating buildings involves moral choices that are subject to moral judgment. This is a quote by Leslie Kane Wiseman, who wrote a book called Discrimination by Design that was generally written looking at issues of gender and sexuality and women's issues.
It relates very much to racial issues as well, which she covered much of. One of the things that's interesting about this quote, and I heard, I don't remember the person who said this, so don't quote me by my quote, but there's a saying that all the injustices that are done within this world, there's always going to be an architect, planner, developer who is going to either follow that agenda by being complacent and follow it because that's what they believe. And so you can always find someone to do the dirty work. So I wanted to start off with this image here. This is a part of an exhibit that I did in 2021. It was called We the Seven, which focused on the 7 schools of architecture that HBCUs have. So the 7 HBCU schools are historically black colleges and or universities, and there are 7 schools that have architecture there. I'm working at Morgan State University, which is an HBCU. I'm intentionally there. I left Canada, actually, from London, Fanshawe College, and moved down to into the Baltimore area. Found Morgan, loved it, and I'm staying there intentionally because of the context of the school. One of the issues that happens when you look at this context of redlining, and also the, wait a minute, let me move back. I'm sorry. Is there a way to go back? I want to make sure I didn't miss a slide. This one? Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I thought I missed a quote here. All right, I want to read this quote as well. This is the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. This is read by W.B. Du Bois in his novel thesis when he was at Harvard, The Souls of Black Folks, done in 1903. Now, this was a response to the failed vision of Abraham Lincoln's hope of transforming race relations in the US after the Civil War, which of course did not happen. And I'm sort of relating this to, as we get into this millennium here, we're looking at the 21st century, and I've heard, I've read articles, I've heard these stories through news, media as well, the sort of post-racial climate that we have, which I also argue is a very false lead into where we are today. So this sort of false lead after Obama's presidency being talked about, I think many of us in this room are sort of aware of the politics of today, some of the stress that's happening, some of the issues that are happening in areas like Florida where they're taking away a lot of the historical context so that people not of color, I guess, don't feel guilty. So there are actually many policies that have been put in place in certain states that are making it even more uncomfortable than it has in the past. And I think there are reasons behind that as well politically, but also I think there's a sense of unease that's been happening. So getting to the color line here, again, this is an exhibit where I was literally exposing some of the work from our students from the 7 schools and exhibiting it at the Venice Biennale, the Architecture Biennale in 2021. And one of the reasons I wanted to show this for this particular talk is that when we talk about environmental justice or injustice, it affects everything at every level. So it affects the school systems that we're in, it affects the health issues within a community, it affects the economy, it affects everyone around it, even those that are not within that environment, even those that are outside. So it's a critical issue, when you talk about even the prison situations, the school situations, the health situations. The African Americans are dying earlier than most in this country. African Americans, Native Americans, any minorities in this country that do not have access are often dying. And this line, this red line, has real significance as to why that is actually happening. And I'll explain that a little more. So some of you, I don't know, some of you may be familiar with this term. It's so I have to go to my notes here, so excuse me. But the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was developed around the 30s, this was a government put in place plan. So this is government planned segregation within this country. So African Americans did not have access to financial access. Banks would not allow them to get mortgages. It was put in place after to actually support those to get mortgages. And after the sorry, let me double check my notes here again. Okay. Well, so basically after it was put in place for the economy to actually begin to rise and repair itself. And within that context, it was not allowed again for banks to begin to give money to African American communities. They weren't also, they actually began to create a system that had A, B, C, D types of levels to begin to qualify and certify and break up the rest of the United States as to what neighborhoods had value and which ones did not. So my talk here today, I'm going to focus on 3 cities that I've actually lived in, Detroit, Baltimore, and New Orleans. And within those cities, the reasons I've chosen those, one, I lived in them. The other is that they each have had, since the beginning of the middle of the 60s, the largest populations, the largest black populations, or the largest African-American populations in these cities. One thing that, when I look at the educational aspect, when you think about this context, if we were actually in an equitable situation, I'd be sitting in a room here with a population that is more reflective of New Orleans, which has approximately 67% of African-American population, as well as minorities, instead of looking at a room full of those that are not, quote unquote, African-American. And that's very significant when I talk about the context of architecture. And so there's an issue that I want to bring up as well about the discipline itself and the injustices, I would say, not just within the discipline, but also going back and relating to that element of education and how the red line has affected everything from little to big. So when we talk about redlining, there are 4 categories, okay? You have A, which is the primary elements for living. You have B, which is says that it's desirable, but it's not. A is excellent, B is desirable, C is it's going down, and the last one, A, B, C, D, is hazardous. So if it's hazardous, that means they're not going to put any money into it. It's not a place to go. So that's the redlining. And these are the cities, when you look at the maps here, when we talk about redlining, this is New Orleans, okay? And in New Orleans, looking at the mass of the city, it's mostly covered in red. This is where the redlining begins. This is where the majority of the African-American community actually lives, and I'd say African-American, Native American, the minorities within this culture, and these are all the danger zones as far as environmental injustice that are actually happening as well. Here you have Detroit. Detroit, same thing. You look at the mass Detroit now has, in the beginning of the millennium, I believe there were 80% of the city of Detroit was African American, which is very high. However, I guarantee if we were sitting in a conference talking about architecture and design and planning and what to do, it would look very much like this audience here as far as people attending. Because we're typically left out of the conversation very much at every step of the way, many different levels. So you can see the mass of the redlining that's actually happening here in Detroit as well. This is Baltimore. Baltimore, what you see there in the red, they call this the black butterfly. This was coined by one of the professors at Morgan State University, Lawrence Brown. And he coined this after looking at the map and just looking at how the city was actually divided. And literally, you have the wings of the butterfly on each side. And if you go right down the middle, it's actually quite, it's more diverse right in that middle section, but these are all livable areas that are cutting through that red line. When I say livable, meaning the economies are not as stressed. But again, when you look at the yellow, those are the boundaries and the areas that are the higher end areas, the higher valued areas, real estate wise. So redlining is a huge issue. And again, these are put in place at, as early as the 30s. I still can't think of the term I was looking for, but it was at the, what is the term where you have, I have to get this out of my head. I've not gotten enough sleep, so be patient, but in the 20s, early 29, what was 1929? We had Great Depression, thank you. I'm sorry, I had a brainwave there. But anyway, after the Great Depression, that was when this policy was put in place. And so since that time, as far as after independence and Freedom Act, you begin to get African Americans being put in places and put into corners, put into spots where they had to actually stay. No, this is Cancer Alley. Many of you may be familiar with this, and I taught at the University of Louisiana in Lafayette at the end of the last millennium. And I was there, I had the opportunity to actually travel down and work with a project with students and looking at Cancer Alley. Those of you that are not familiar with Cancer Alley, it's in between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and it's about an 85-mile stretch of land where you have these huge chemical plants that are next to housing districts, and this is also part of the sort of redlining strait that was put in place economically. The majority of the folks that are there are lower income, majority African American, and these plants here are the cause of cancer that has been happening within the majority of the people that live in this area. However, it was mentioned in one of the other presentations that when you're in this situation, it is not easy to move out. You don't have the resources to move out. You don't have anyone that wants to buy your homes. You're pretty much stuck in that area unless you just decide to leave and if you have any other resources to go out. But when we were there, an alarm went off, and when that alarm went off, we had to run inside. It was called a chemical shower that was about to happen. So when that chemical shower happened, we all, we ran into one of the houses while we were there. But the house that we were in, it was actually not as structured as this one here. It felt like almost a shack, and almost if you're being contained in this shower or whatever is falling around you, was something that I guess when you're inside this sort of container, it doesn't feel comfortable, it doesn't feel safe, and you can understand the implications if a house has to breathe. Somehow, whatever's falling is going to get inside that house somehow. So it was not a safe area. You can also see the scale. I mean, here you have the chemical plant there up at the top, and then you have the house down at the bottom, which is much smaller. Again, this is New Orleans, one of the issues that after Katrina, and the areas that has been affected, I believe it's on the east side, but it's one of the landfills that has been causing a lot, again, ailments of health within this particular area. And I believe this is on the Agricultural Street, I think the name is it. But this is an area that, again, we're having issues, or they're having issues of health and safety within this particular area. So again, this redlining and where these areas are susceptible, where these people are susceptible, again, is causing issues that are harming not just the environment, but harming people. Another issue within Detroit, in the red line areas, are the plants that are happening, the auto plants that have been built. This is one of the Jeep plants that they're protesting, where they were doing production that was being put in place. It was releasing other types of chemicals that were being, where the public was being affected. They wanted to stop this. This is a protest that has been happening and been ongoing, where they wanted to stop what they call the poisoning of Detroit. And Detroit has had conflicts for years, which some of you may know of over time outside of the riots, where people have been trying to actually move upwards. These redlined areas, again, over time have not changed, and they still exist today. There's a sense of residue from the past that still exists today, and it's very much problematic as we move forward. So here's one little bright spot in Baltimore. It's the Curtis Bay region. And in 2013, a study found Baltimore to be the deadliest city when it comes to emissions related to mortality rates. Curtis Bay is one of the worst affected communities in this area. Now this area was actually saved by a student that grew up in this area, and she was concerned about the environment, concerned about her family that was becoming ill. Their asthma was a big issue in this particular region. And from her studies, she gathered 10 students to begin to create this protest. So Destiny Watford tackled this pollution issue in Baltimore, and she was actually able to get this chemical plant, or this plant that was going to be moving into the area, to stop moving their product into that area. And she was able to do that by getting the primary school education on board. She went to the school board, she went to the community, they went door to door. Many people at the beginning of the community, of course, were not very interested because they didn't feel like they had the power to actually make this move. However, she was very persistent in making sure that she could get this plant to stop being advanced to build another plant near their home, or near her home. She was successful in it. To this day, the company decided that they had to move out of that region and move out of that area, which they have. And beyond that, to my knowledge, she's still protesting that area to get rid of the plants that still exist at this point in time. So it's still a very controversial area. There's still many issues there that still exist within that zone. But that being said, she was able to actually put something into action to move and remove at least one of the plants at this point in time. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, I guess, towards the end of this, is looking at issues around design that I tend to have a few problems with as someone that's grown up in the U.S., but also someone that's been in, in this design field. And one of those issues is, again, looking at representation. Now, when I listened to a lot of the presentations yesterday, probably yesterday more so, I'm very pleased that everyone is very focused in understanding, ways that they could begin to make things better for everyone. But one of the things that continues to resonate in the back of my head when I hear some of the talk, and I say this because I've done a lot of work abroad on the African continent specifically, but Americans tend, generally speaking, have a tendency to go to the continent of Africa as if they're saviors, almost like a Superman going to save this country. They're going to save these folks. And what I appreciated about the presentations that were given is that, when people are actually able to take the reins by themselves and really begin to understand that they are you and you are them, then, if you see us as we see you and we begin to become equals, I think that's the only way we can actually move forward. And I say that happens at so many different levels that we don't need to go in there thinking that we're going to save the world, we're going to save these folks. I think you have to understand that you are those folks. And we have to begin to, that relationship has to be reciprocal in some ways. And until we're seen as humans, as human beings, as full human beings within this context, you stop the redlining, the redlining continues to happen. Just one example that I'll give before I go as well. There's a community in Prince George's County in Maryland, which is one of the wealthiest communities for African Americans. Within that community, the realtors will go into that area and create blocks for those that are African American and minorities, and then they'll sell the same type of home, a few blocks over, and they'll say, oh, this is for the other or the white community. So these are actually problematic issues. Race has become this element of a design within our context. We even call ourselves black, white, Caucasian, a thing that doesn't even exist unless you live in the Caucasus. So really understanding the context of why we are actually using these terms to define us, where we're these elements of color, objects, instead of human beings. I think we have to begin to change the language. So going back to what Leslie Kang-Wiseman is saying, space-like language is a part of the way that we understand what we do within design. So we have to begin to be respectful, but also reciprocal of that way, the way we speak and the way we build. Okay. I'm going to leave it at that. That's my last slide. So thank you. Okay, and thank you for your patience, folks. Yeah.
No, that has been great. Thank you so much, Coleman. We really appreciate that. Right now, we're going to move to our next presentations. Do you want me to go up? Our next presenters are from Bangladesh, and I'm so sorry that they're not here with us today in person, and we really appreciate that they are connected at 2 something in the morning in Bangladesh time and being able to be with us. So let me introduce our next speakers. We are introducing Ehsanul Hoque and Sultan Mahmud. So Ehsanul is an assistant environmental officer at United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR. He's trained in environmental science and development studies, focusing on environmental audit and environmental economics. He had the chance to apply for the training through 13 years of working experience in sectors of environmental protection in humanitarian settings, co-management of natural resources, community-based adaptation to climate change, integrated floodplain management, disaster management. And he has worked in development, humanitarian sectors in Uganda, Timor-Leste, and Bangladesh. And our other presenter today is Sultan Mahmud. He's also an assistant settlement planning officer at UNHCR. He's an urban and regional planner and has diverse work experiences in urban, rural, and regional planning, disaster preparedness and management, and emergency planning. So in his current role since 2019, he has been actively engaged in the preps of macro and micro settlement plannings for the camp and subsequent implementation of these plans. So we thank you very much for your availability and being able to join us, though online, and we are very much looking forward to your presentation.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, you can hear me. That's great. So good afternoon, colleagues. Ehsanul Hoque, as Hadi just introduced, and we are here to share mostly, how climate change is affecting the life of the forcibly displaced people, and specifically in Bangladesh, and some primary findings from one of the pilots that we have been implementing for last 2 years in the refugee situations. So just for the interest of time, I'm not going into details of the introduction and all those things. Let's see the global picture of the displaced population trend. Just a minute. Some technical issue I can see. Yeah. So the chart actually is showing the number of forced displacement from 2012 to 2022. And as you can see that unfortunately the trend is positive. And in 2022, the number actually crossed the 100 million mark. And as per UNHCR's estimate, by 2023, it further, reached to 117.2 million. And out of these, 17% of the refugees and 80% of the IDP, which are originating from the countries which are actually hit hardest by the climate change impact. Like for Bangladesh, most of the refugees are coming from, our neighbor, Myanmar, which is also one of the climate vulnerable country. And again, Bangladesh is another climate hotspot. And one World Bank study revealed that by 2050, more 143 million people would be internally displaced from 3 major climate hotspots, from Latin America, from Africa, from Asia. So for Bangladesh, what we did for the refugee camps, we actually used one scenario, which is SSP, shared socioeconomic scenario 245, which used the output of 13 global circulations model. And that predicted that in the current years, the average mean and maximum monthly temperature would also increase, which means that agricultural productivity and human health will be affected. And then same for monthly rainfall, I mean mean and maximum rainfall average, that will also increase, which means that we may experience more flash flood and landslide in the refugee camps. Now, when we talk about justice, and then we should also think about that, I mean, to what extent different age, gender, and diversity are impacted by climate change. Just for an example, I mean, in the refugee culture, Rohingya refugee culture in Bangladesh, I mean, most of the time, the household chores that are actually taken care of by the women, including the child rearing and all those. Now, if it is the one flooding situation, then you need to think about that where all the water supply outlets are, because then women needs to fetch the water. Then same for the children, whether they can access the learning centers during the flooding situation or these types of situation. So in our design, we try to incorporate this, I mean, impact felt by different age groups and gender. And few technical terminology that we'll be frequently using. We thought that it would be good to have it I mean, defined, like for watershed, which is an area which drains or shed all the water to a common outlet. Then we will also be using nature-based solution, NBS, so frequently, which are some action to address any societal challenges and which also will sustainably manage and restore natural or modified ecosystems. Then we will also be using sustainable land use management, the use of land resources to produce goods and meet human needs, simultaneously ensuring the long-term productivity of these resources. And then hotspot, which is actually a location where changes in average weather will have a negative effect on the living standards. Just taking the opportunity to show the camps in the larger settings. On the left-hand side, as you can see, the purple color cluster, those are the camps are in different clusters, and the international border is so nearby. And we are also showing the protected forest, which is so close to the camps. And as you can see, camps are also near to the, near to the ocean. And these camps are hosted in the southernmost district of Bangladesh, which is also a popular tourist destination. Now about climate change, I mean, the multiplier impact, and in the right-hand side, the map is showing the major cyclone track historically, and the red rectangle just in the southern most point, which are the camps. As you can see, that camps are within the major track of the cyclone path. And the picture that we are seeing here is a kind of landscape picture of the camp. As you can see, that these are bare hills. Also, soil texture is not good, I mean, kind of loose, and also the density. So if we compare the density of the camps or the site where we actually worked in the last few years, if we compare the density with New Orleans, it is around, I mean, more than 80 times higher than New Orleans city population. And then for Dhaka, if we compare it with Dhaka, which is the mostly dense city and the capital of Bangladesh, the project site is 3 times higher. So another World Bank study revealed that if greenhouse gas emissions remain unabated, so by 2050, living standards will drop by 20%. So this needs to be addressed. Climate change impact needs to be considered in terms of planning. That is the main message. So to address these, we actually used some planning tool. For that, I have my expert colleague with me. So over to you, Sultan.
Thank you, Ehsan. Just before going to the planning part, let me give a little background. So now we are talking about the world's largest refugee camp, which is Kutupalong Mega Refugee Camp. So before 2017, it was not like that. A small portion have been used as the refugee camp, but when in 2017 we received around 750,000 refugees from Myanmar within a very short time, then that became a huge refugee camp as like world's largest refugee camp. So these area were not a habitable land before. It was a forest with hilly terrain, and this used to be a elephant route. As Ehsan was showing another map, this protected forest. So this has been an area where we have elephants passing through these camp areas. And then when the influx happened in 2017, within a short time, a big number of people arrived here, and the camp was developed spontaneously with the emergency shelter support from different agencies. So the refugees prepared their own plot and they built their own shelter with the support provided by different agencies. That's how total 31 refugee camps were settled. And here in this map, we have, out of that 31, here we have 25. And previously, we have one previous camp from 1991, registered camp. So in total is 26 camps is Kutupalong Mega Refugee Camp. Under this macro settlement plan, we are calling it as a special strategy to organize the camp through an incremental replanning process. As I mentioned, it was developed organically, so we could not plan the camp in a way that having a planned camp, because the time span was very short and the total number of refugees were like huge. So after they settle down, the agencies working here, mainly UNHCR and IOM, who is managing the camp for camp management as well as shelter and site development. So they were they have started working with this macro settlement plan, and they invited UN Habitat to do this plan. So with the technical support of UN Habitat, this plan was developed. So it has 3 major layers. First one is blue-green network, which is basically a connection with this green space and blue spaces. Basically, forest and water bodies were connected with this layer. The next one is infrastructural corridor. As I said, it was a forest area, so there are no access network inside these areas. So it is working as a skeleton of the camp, and it has different layers, different hierarchy. So primary, secondary, tertiary access network. So primary one is connected with national road access. Secondary, tertiary are mostly inside the camp. The third one is land use. As I said, is not all the areas are usable for shelter and facilities, as it has hilly terrain. So we have differentiate the areas into 3 categories. First one is 0 to 15 degrees slope, which is more suitable for building. The next one is 16 degrees to 30 degrees, which is moderate. If we want to build something that requires huge site development or site preparation. The last one is more than 30 degrees slope, where we try to avoid any kind of development because of landslide risk. So that's how, by combining these 3 layers, we prepared this macro settlement plan. Let me go a bit detail for this blue-green network. So this blue-green network is a combination of 4 components. First one is water basin and stream network, then flood risk map, then landslide risk map, and elephant corridor. By combining these 4 layers, we prepared this blue-green network layer. The main objective for this blue-green network is to mitigate the negative impact on environment, reduce the disaster risk, conserve and enhance biodiversity, and create cleaner, safe, and open public space for the community. Next slide, please. So here we try to see the camp location with the overall watershed in that areas. So we see the overall watershed, comparing the overall watershed, the camp location is comparatively less than the outside of camp areas, is from 4% to 31%, which is a major portion of this watershed is outside the camp boundaries. Though we are working, this plan was prepared for the camp boundaries, we also try to look after the areas outside, because camp is an administrative boundary, but this watershed does not follow that one. So we also, beside these camp areas, we try to incorporate the overall catchment while planning for these areas. Over to you, Ehsan.
Thank you so much, Sultan. So yeah, with that initial knowledge, we actually pre-piloted one intervention in one of the comparatively less dense upper stream camp. As you can see in the screen, that actually we tried to restore a kind of 1.8 kilometer long stream, and along with a walkway which connected some of the services and facilities, including playground, vegetable garden, administrative facilities, or food distribution and non-food distribution centers. And we also monitored the mobility of the people. Like in Rohingya culture, many of the women, they are not using the using the vehicular road, and also for the children there was the chance of road traffic accident. So we monitored, and we have found that they are using it. And for designing this pilot community, we engaged them, and based on the learning of this pre-pilot, we then moved our project or our intervention to another densely populated area, which is in between Camp 1W 1 West and Camp 2 West. And we actually started the project with one initial assessment. We documented the land use management history, forest management history. And as you can see that just on our left-hand side before the influx, this was completely forested, we severely said. And then 30 to 40 years ago, there are only 7 to 8 families who are living intermittently, mostly to come and just manage their vegetable gardens. And just immediately after the influx, now the population increased to, many folds. Now 17,000 refugees are there, and moreover 400 host community members are also there. The area is exposed to landslide, flooding, and also fire incidents. There are other problems that communities and the actors altogether identified, which also during the initial assessment phase, we engaged with them, and we inquired that what are the capacities that they have, kind of co-creation or co-designing of the intervention. And based on that, this project, which we title as Sustainable Land Management and Environmental Rehabilitation, in the map, it is showing the site, and which is the intervention area mostly. And the main objective is to reduce the disaster risks. The climate change is manifested by increased risk of disasters. And other two objectives are mostly supporting that kind of as a mean. And then we followed the approach of community engagement, following the age, gender diversity approach. We did some participatory rural appraisal using the tools, focus group discussion with men, boys, women and men, elderly. Some individual interviews are also there. And So from all the engagement with the community and initial assessment, we have identified some of the problems for which to be addressed. Multi-sectoral actions are required, and now 8 different sectors are working together to address those problems. Just for an example, if it is only for water quality improvement, I mean, since the stream, main stream which drains all the water, that has been actually clogged with the excess amount of waste and also sedimentation. So wash sector needs to intervene, then site development sector needs to collaborate as well with wash, and same for solid waste management. So for all those problems, these types of collaboration was required, and same for multi-scale coordination and governance, one in camp level and then again with the community. And we also utilized the scope of facility rationalization, relocation or replanning of the shelters and infrastructures, and which is aligned with the overall macro settlement plan that Sultan just talked about. So on the right-hand side, topmost one is the site plan with the solutions reflected in the map, which includes a playground, walkway, a riparian plantation zone, and also slope stabilization for where landslide vulnerabilities that we have identified. So some results. So if it is about flood vulnerability reduction, let me draw your attention to the maps of the same site in 2021 and 2023. It is about flood affected shelter. For the leftmost map, the red dots are flood vulnerable households which were affected in 2021 flood. Almost for the similar situation in 2023, those are now green. And as we can see that since we reworked the stream, widened it and re-excavated, now it has more water retention capacity. Some of the households which are already within the encroached stream bed, we had to relocate them. 39 some shelter we relocated. 48 wash facilities which are flood prone. There are a chance that those will go underwater and some contamination could be leaked from those. So that are also relocated either or decommissioned. Same for a few learning centers, and then regular solid waste management is ongoing. And for landslides in 2021, the red small rectangles are the areas which are susceptible to landslide, and there are 21 such locations we have identified. Now in the rightmost map, which shows that we addressed or intervened in 11 such locations. Few other households are also relocated to safer places. Other activities are ongoing for slope stabilization, and for this we mostly use plant-based solution, some grass and mixed vegetation where it is possible. For some slope which was not possible, we went for hybrid, plant-based plus engineered solution. Then when it is about inclusion, we talked about women, elderly and children. This walkway and other bridges, we tried to incorporate all the aspects of age, gender and diversity. Walkway, we tried to maintain the 900 millimeter width in most of the places where it was possible. And which has been agreed in the intersector coordination group level. And for the bridges and all those railings that we ensured. And on the left-hand side of the same site at night, as you can see, that solar street light, the walkway is now lit, especially for the crucial services like toilets and all those areas we targeted. We identified which needs to be lit. And this walkway also contributed to reduce the time for disaster response. Excuse me. So a pair of picture, before and after. Left-hand side, as you can see, there was no walkway and some waterlogged condition, so which was the mosquito breeding ground. And now when we, community, especially the children and women shared that if we can develop this land, that could be small community gathering place. Children can play there. So that's there we are now. And also, like for this area, there are some spots which we identified as black spot. People are using waste indiscriminately, and those are not under any management. And same for the stream. There, despite of having bins, they are throwing waste. Now, when we brought those and collaborated with livelihood unit and brought those under management with climate smart agriculture, these types of spaces which can tolerate intensive rainfall, now we can see that people are taking care of those lands when those are under management. And this is the future scenario that we want to see. And this is from the Kalamchora, the first pre-pilot, where, as Sultan mentioned, that green spaces are connected and blue spaces, our blue lines are restored. And we want to see that in future, refugees, refugees and environment will be, living together in harmony. So some key messages and implications that we want to communicate through this forum, that climate change coupled with many underlying and pre-existed factors increase the vulnerability of the forcibly displaced population, as we have seen in case of Bangladesh. And then globally, 22% of the refugees live in the camp or camp-like situation. Many other also live in urban areas. It may happen that those are not in any tropical setting, but at least this knowledge could be applied for similar situation. And for such situation, along with the macro settlement planning tool, nature-based solution should be promoted, and community engagement is definitely the crucial part. If community engagement could be ensured from the beginning, then it can, increase the likelihood of that the result will be sustained. So thank you so much for all the patience, and thanks again. If you have any question, please feel free to ask. And these are our contact. Even later, you can contact with us. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Ehsan and Sultan, for your presentations. We are going to move to our next two speakers here in person with us. Francisco.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. We'll have you with us in the panel discussion following the two more presentations we have over here. So let me introduce our two next speakers. We have Francisco and Isabella. Francisco Suárez, he's the director of the Illinois School of Architecture and the ACSA Distinguished Professor. He's an architect, an educator, an urbanist from Puerto Rico. He has studied at Georgia Tech, Université de Paris, Harvard GSD, and he earned a Master's in Architecture with distinction, winning the AIA Medal, Portfolio Award, and the Fulbright Fellowship. He has previously served as the Dean at the University of Puerto Rico, School of Architecture, and has taught and lectured at various universities around the world. He's a founding principal at RSVP Architects and a former president of the Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture, the ACSA. Francisco. We're going to move now to Isabella Hillman. She's an architect and teaching assistant professor at Illinois School of Architecture. She holds a bachelor's degree in environmental design and master's degree in architecture from the University of Puerto Rico. Isabella's expertise extends from her work with renowned architecture firms like Toro Arquitectos and Coleman Davis Pagan Architects in her native country to groundbreaking research in biomimicry and structural innovation for rural and urban schools impacted by natural disasters. So she has received recognition for her work, for award-winning designs addressing the challenges of rising sea levels in Miami due to global warming and climate change. Francisco and Isabella, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Hadi, thank you, Lucia, thank you, Isi, thank you, Nano, for inviting us to this magnificent event. It's an honor and a privilege to share this beautiful room with you and to be here in New Orleans again, which for us is like the closest to being at home. This is very similar to San Juan. Last night we were in the balcony outside of Antoine's and we were saying how much we feel like we were in Puerto Rico. And I'll tell you a few things as we present some projects that our students were here after Katrina, and they felt like they were at home as well, for many reasons that we'll talk about. But it's also great to share this space with people who are committed to making a profound difference in the world. We may differ in the platforms that we use, in the ways that we explain them, in the places that we practice, but there's a shared DNA of people here who are convinced that tomorrow is going to be better than yesterday, and we can achieve that through design. So just sharing this energy, it's quite a privilege, and I've truly enjoyed all of the presentations. We are both representing the Illinois School of Architecture, which is the oldest public school of architecture in the US, but we're also here as citizens from Puerto Rico. We were born and raised there. We lived there. We've been there through hurricanes, through earthquakes, through all sorts of challenges. And I'm also here as an academic who has attempted to bring that to the center of what we do in architecture school. Last week, I turned 53. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because the first studio that I ever taught was at the Boston Architectural Center when I was getting my master's at the GSD, and I was 23. So technically I've been teaching at the university level for 30 years now. 15 of those as what some people call academic administrator, although I don't know how to administer anything. So I prefer academic leader or somebody who's a designer. I'm a designer. I'm a practicing architect, and I'm a designer in an administrative position. So what do? I design ideas, I design processes, I design opportunities, I design platforms, and the day that I run out of things to design, then I have no longer any reason to be in that position and in that chair. So let's, do we have the little thingy? Thank you. So yes, I had the privilege of being elected president of ACSA and being able to discuss some of these things to a larger audience. That was in 2017. That was my first conference as president, and that was in Marfa, and it was 3 weeks after Hurricane Maria hit San Juan, hit Puerto Rico. That was the magazine that was published that month. And it was, so I arrived at Marfa, which is not easy to get to, and it wasn't easy to get out of San Juan 3 weeks after Maria. I think the gentleman yesterday who said that New Orleans spent 8 days without power, and that was quite the challenge. We spent 8 months without power. This is in US soil in the 21st century. And there were houses up in the mountains that didn't have power for over a year. Now that's a challenge. So I'm talking there in 2017, at the same time the American Institute of Architects is saying, listen, we do have a problem. We have to talk about this. How do we, this one? And this is the condition that we had in 2017, right? I made it there to Marfa after Hurricane Maria, but 2 weeks before Hurricane Maria, we were hit by Hurricane Irma, which at that moment was the largest hurricane in the history of the Atlantic, only to be toppled 2 weeks later by Hurricane Maria as the largest hurricane in the history of the Atlantic. Hurricane Irma scraped the corner of Puerto Rico. At that moment, Maria was a tropical depression that became a Category 5 hurricane in 36 hours. In a year that the waters were warmer than average. That is 2017. A lot of people in the US know what happened with Harvey in Houston. with Nate, close to between Louisiana and Mississippi, Irma that I talked before, and Maria. So 4 hurricanes that made landfall in the US, including Puerto Rico. Look at the temperature, the average temperatures of the waters between 1991 and 2023. I mean, look at 2023, look at the average between 1991 and 2020. So in many ways, we have to talk, who's responsible for this and who's paying the price for this? And normally it's not the same group. We can go back to 1900 and the Galveston hurricane as the big one, right? 8,000 people died because of that hurricane. And it's also, it coincides with basically the weather, the creation of the Weather Bureau. And which reminds me of something. Do you know where the word hurricane comes from? It's not the drink in Pat O'Brien's, although it's a good drink. In Spanish, it's huracán, and it comes from the term huracán, which is a native term of the Taíno natives in the Caribbean, which thought that the god of evil was huracán and would punish them every once in a while through these storms that came out of nowhere. Now, the storm, and if you read Isaac Storm, which is a very good book, recommended to everyone, the storm in Galveston came overnight. Nobody really knew that storm was coming unless you knew that the barometric pressure, or you had something like that at home and you knew that the pressure was going down. There were Jesuits in Cuba, in an observatory in Cuba, who called and said, that hurricane is not going up Florida. That hurricane is heading towards Texas. Be careful. And they said, what are these priests saying, these crazy Jesuits? What do they know about hurricanes? And indeed, it went in that direction. And like the Taíno natives, they didn't know that it was going to hit them. They didn't have radar. They didn't have all these 24 hours news about weather services like we do now. And now we know when they're coming. We know what causes them. We know what heats the water. And yet we're really not doing that much to work on it. I don't need to talk about Katrina to a place that suffered it. All I want to say is that when something like this happens to us in Puerto Rico, we're not looking at it abstractly like, oh, we're safe from this one, it went somewhere else. No, I mean, we've been through these things. We've seen the people who die. We've seen the people who lost everything. So anytime something like this happens, we feel it. We empathize. There's a feeling of solidarity. When Haiti had the earthquake, when Katrina had the hurricane. And immediately, we decided at the University of Puerto Rico to come here. We didn't really know what we were going to do, but we came over. We had like I said, we feel at home in the city. We feel we share the history, the music, the food. A lot of the architects in Puerto Rico and architects who teach at the University of Puerto Rico were trained at Tulane. My brother-in-law went to LSU. My son-in-law, we're going to see him tomorrow. He's driving down from Baton Rouge, and he's going to meet us here. So there's a connection between Louisiana and Puerto Rico. There used to be a direct flight between San Juan and New Orleans. So there are several of us there from different schools, from the University of Houston, from Tulane, from Georgia Tech, from UWM, who came here with our students. And to my surprise, and I'm not necessarily celebrating this, our students went to the lower Ninth Ward and they felt at home being there and talking to the community and almost becoming a part of the community. Here with Gabriela, with Natalia, and Juisa, talking to some community leaders, who then invited them home inside the houses to talk about their history, to talk about what they wanted, to talk about their dreams, and to talk about their nightmares. So hopefully whatever these students did fed their dreams and not necessarily their nightmares. And it was a beautiful, beautiful moment for us to see that, to witness that engagement. And then here, the three of them are presenting their project at an ACSA conference. I wasn't the president that year, but I was, I felt honored and proud to see them later presenting the work and returning to New Orleans and returning to show the work to the communities. And like I said, these are hurricanes that have gone through Puerto Rico, so it happens. Every time the hurricane season starts until this week or next week, whenever they stop, we go through a collective PTSD, knowing that what happens to us every time something like this goes over the island. That is a federal study that was done after Hurricane Georges in Puerto Rico, and about the dangers and perils of building like the way we were building in the coasts. There's a newspaper that says Sin freno la construcción en zonas inundables de Puerto Rico. Basically that the construction in flood zones in Puerto Rico is out of control. And this was Hurricane Maria as it came into the island. Look at the size. And these are the areas that have problems with flooding. The drawing, the collage down below was done by two architects some years ago. They have a collective called AEIOU, and it was done almost to say what could happen with water level rise in Puerto Rico. The image above, it's almost a copy, and it is the mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz, with somebody who was going about in a kayak with the whole city flooded. These are not the images you think when the tourism company sends all these posters, visit Puerto Rico, come to Puerto Rico, tourism, the hotels. But that was the reality that we were seeing there. I mean, it doesn't really, it's not published, they don't talk about it, but. And there was a competition that at the beginning I was not really interested in. It was about the designing of a resilient home. And I'm also a little tired of the term resilient, and they keep telling us that we're very resilient in Puerto Rico, but I'm actually very tired of being resilient. But my students said, we want to compete, and I inquired about it. I said, well, it's only for licensed engineers and architects, and they're going to build, wherever the winner is. And I asked, well, can I put my license and have the students work on the project? I said, sure, you can do that. And they actually won the second place of the house, and the agreement was that they were going to build the winning one, and I thought the students' house was better than the one that won. But then they decided they were going to build the students' one as well because they liked it a lot. And this was when they participated in the Biennale with the boards they prepared. And the way that house could then multiply and come together and fill different lots or become multi-family housing instead of individual housing, which I thought was the interesting proposal that they brought to the table. But then I was really interested in the larger scale, not just in the scale of the house, but in the scale of the territory. And this was a studio that we did and actually it was a joint studio with Cooper Union, because Nader Terani called me and he said he wanted to do something, he wanted to participate. And this is a group of students, and I'm proud to say that Isabella was part of this studio, and actually her proposal, her master plan was the one that won the competition, and they worked on it. And after that, Isabella got interested in this theme. And she went to TU Delft in the Netherlands to study in water and coastal communities, received her master's, and has started teaching, and is now, I'm proud to say that she's now a colleague who's been working, last year she was working in the island of Vieques, in the part of the archipelago of Puerto Rico. And this semester she's working with Hadi and his colleagues in Venice with the UAV, working also on climate change. So, as a professor, and back to the term as an academic leader, academic administrator, creating these possibilities, creating these opportunities, and then seeing, witnessing what happens with the community, but also what happens when your students are also becoming citizens and responsible citizens and people who want to make a difference. And then, you know, I see Isabella what she's doing, which now I learn from her rather than the other way around. So I'll leave it here with, and you can continue to tell the story.
Thank you. And again, thank you, ECC, Nano, and everyone for having us. But as Francisco was saying, this project was really interesting because I think it was our first project right after Maria, and it was a site that, as we can see in the next images, and these were our charrettes that we did with Cooper, and we did small models, just a quick study of the site. That we couldn't go to the site for various reasons that we'll see now. So this was right after Maria. The site was completely flooded. That relates back to the images that people were in canoes and kayaks and trying to move their way through the streets. But this is a very big park that sadly is closed off from the city. The city doesn't really respond to the park. And days before the students of Cooper Union came in and we also wanted to see the site, this was, it was inaccessible. And these are seasonal tides that happen, usually in March, that bring in the sand. And this started, right, nature started to say what it wanted. And what it wanted is you need to further the coastline. And as you can see in the bottom of the image, I don't know if I can point, I don't know. There is a structure that is kind of being almost eaten by the water, and that coastline in Ocean Park is very known for that. And so we had many challenges. One was that there's very low density around that area that doesn't really benefit the site. The park is mostly for sports, has little green areas. And so how can we then transform this land and shape the coastline to benefit from it? And the first thing was to respond to what nature's told us in the first picture and increase it downwards. Connecting also two important avenues, which is McClary Avenue and Park Boulevard. And so actually creating a boulevard that gave a beachfront and giving a park that was permeable, and that big blue walkway, as the presenters from TU Delft this morning said that a street was going to be like a river. Well, the same as this walkway is a river that connects the north to the south, sloped, and so water can redirect itself and be permeated down into the soil rather than it staying and being stuck. And so also creating more, not so much lower density, but medium density housing and multi-use buildings around the park to engage the community. And so here you can see an overall, how the park overall extended. Also to the south, you can see that it's a big expressway, and our plan was also to take away the expressway, create a big boulevard that had a lineal park. And so it helped also connect those all segregated communities that are around the area, and most of them are low income and governmental housing that have always been marginalized and not presented as being part of that coastal community. And so here is the model that we presented. And it was also always kind of a talking point to visiting faculty from elsewhere here. Many years ago, I was presenting to Georgia Tech visiting faculty of what the plan entailed. And so going into another, and this is more now into my current research and my current work, this was a proposal I did actually a year ago, which is, it was a proposal for the Miami Floating Housing Ideas Competition. And it was really interesting because it talked about two things. And the first thing is the inevitable that we've seen of maps around these a day and a half. We've seen these maps over and over, but it's the reality that in probably 80 years, cities like Miami, coastal cities will be flooded. And so what do we do? And instead of saying, and yesterday in the panel that was discussed, and instead of saying, okay, let's flee and let's migrate away from the coast, what happens if we stay in the coast and we design for the people that stay? And let's say, well, why don't we design things that float? And so this also brought another interesting topic, that it's all about climate gentrification, and especially in the community of Little Haiti in Miami. And these headlines are starting to talk about how these residents are losing their home away from home, because people in the coast now want to move inland, because the big condos that we saw in this image are not going to be used, right? They might, the first level, which is the entry level, cannot be used at all. So they want to move inland, and as moving inland, they're displacing this community away from it. And so here you can see that difference in density, the lower density of Little Haiti with the markets that are, it's the central node of the community, and then towards the background, what is Brickell and Miami Beach. And so even though the idea was to preserve the culture and the history of Little Haiti and preserve the community, the site was in the water because it was a floating housing competition. And one of the most important things to do was to connect the coast and the park, which is Legion Park, to that little island, Picnic Island, and that being kind of your axis. And so as in the proposal, that was the main axis, but from there you had areas that had the housing units, and the housing units were interlaced with different other program areas, such as hydroponic gardens, fishing areas, community centers, and a water recollection tower. So then the community starts to be on its own, it starts to thrive as itself in a community. And so going into preserving that history of Little Haiti, and also the history of Haitian architecture, we examined Haitian typology in housing, and this is the gingerbread typology. And it's really very Caribbean. And here it just diagrams, but there was a lot of color, and there was also the use of balconies and the use of these pitched roofs that obviously help with natural ventilation, and that knowing that the balcony, as we experienced last night in Antoine's and in the French Quarter, the balcony is that interior-exterior area where you're in and participating in the city, but you're also in your home, and so it's very important for, I would say, for all the Caribbean community. And so then here are the proposals, and so there were 3 types of modules that interlace each other, and they started creating different densities, right? From one bedroom to 3 bedroom. And it's important to note that how do we float this structure? How does it work? We research a lot into vernacular methods that are used in Thailand, where they just use plastic drums or empty oil drums with wood, and they create this truss system that creates the buoyancy. And obviously these structures were proposed to be of wood and lighter materials. And so it was very important that when we present the work and in our renderings, we show the true color of the Caribbean and also the color of that community that is so expressed in the market, which was also a very central piece. But also the idea that your first level of your home becomes an area where you can sell your goods, where you can cut hair, where you can have friends over, and it's always open to the walkways and to the circulation, and also opening up for natural ventilation, and again, that connection towards the community always. And also it's important to note that through this, we also took our stance, again, what we thought of this climate gentrification issue and the fact that we in Puerto Rico also live it. We're living it. It's very expensive to buy or to rent apartments right now in Ocean Park and Santurce, which is not to the coast, but it's near that area. And so it's a way of how do you resist this, but also how do you preserve your identity here. And so just to finish, as Francisco mentioned, we are collaborating with the UF in Venice in a project in Verona, also thinking about how do we design how do we master plan cities for the future, but also for the future of that is going to be subject to climate change. And in a city such as Verona, same as Venice, that had so much rich history, and how do you preserve that? So that's a very exciting thing that's going to be happening, and hopefully it can be later presented for the next time. And we just want to finish off with, I think, one of the best images that we, as people from Puerto Rico and New Orleans and all areas of hurricane activity, when we see this, is like, oh my God, it's over, thank God. We made it through the season. And so we just want to finish on that note. So thank you.
Thank you. So we are now going to move to the last presentation of this panel before moving to the open conversation. I'm happy to introduce you to Kurt Marsh. Kurt is a landscape architect and project leader at Snøhetta in New York, where he has worked since 2017. At Snøhetta, Kurt has worked on a wide range of projects across different climates, cities, and landscapes in the United States. He has worked on small gardens and plazas, libraries, streetscapes, as well as several large-scale urban design proposals. Kurt is currently leading the landscape design of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library in western North Dakota, the El Paso Children's Museum, and a visioning plan for Spear Boulevard and Cherry Creek in Denver, Colorado. Kurt's work at Snøhetta has focused on the creation of vibrant public spaces designed to bring people in closer contact with their cities, landscapes, ecologies, and each other. Welcome, Kurt.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ECC, Nano, all of New Orleans for having us here. It's exciting. It's exciting to be up here with this panel of specialists. We talked about a lot of interesting, very specific places in the world dealing with problems. At Snøhetta, I'd say we're more prolific. These are our offices and our projects around the world. I work in New York. The company was founded in Oslo, so it has Scandinavian roots, though the two founding partners, one is Norwegian and the other is American. So the two largest offices are currently in New York and in Oslo, but you can see that we work everywhere. So how do you address climate change, resiliency, and justice in a variety of contexts? It's different than focusing on specifics, and our projects are, this is what we're known for. In many ways, we were sort of born on the water. The two first projects of the office were the Alexandra Library and the Norwegian Oslo Opera House. They both have a particular position on a waterfront, and they both embody a value that the firm has carried forward since these projects, which is generosity. Generosity to the public realm specifically. These are both cultural projects. They're institutional. The Opera House, opera houses are not known for being equitable places necessarily. However, this one has a massive landscape that sweeps up to the roof and provides public access to the waterfront that was not there before. The Alexandra Library is very similar, has plazas outside. It was actually the site of some resistance during the Arab Spring and is recently celebrating an anniversary. So we do create these iconic buildings around the world. Many of them are on waterfronts. Norway is a maritime community. And these are very important spaces. I'm not a building architect. I was trained as a building architect and a landscape architect, but I work as a landscape architect. We also work as landscape architects, interior designers, graphic designers, and product designers. We work at a master planning scale, as well as at a building scale, as well as at an even smaller scale. And in all of these projects, we do try to find places to create public spaces that are generous, that are giving back to the city and giving back to the community, but also that because we work in so many places, we look to design places that are non-prescriptive. We bring people to the waterfront, we allow people to see the landscape, but we don't necessarily tell them what to do there. We like to see what people do themselves. And I think our projects, another unique thing, and this one is a very small project, it's literally some stones in a pond. But all of these things, from the Oslo Opera House to this project, to the one that we recently completed in Venice, try to shift and change people's perspectives on the landscapes that they're occupying. I find that people sort of walk around a bit in a haze these days and they don't understand the environments they occupy. It's not because they don't want to, it's because we're bombarded with other things. And so actually allowing people or sort of inviting people to slow down, to look, and to really understand their relationship to the ground, the water, and the other creatures that occupy the world really helps people understand that they are part of a larger network, that they are not acting alone, and that the places that they live are beautiful and special. So I'm going to talk about 3 projects that I think are actually very similar to these examples that I just showed you. One is the Opera House. Another is a larger master plan for a waterfront in Oregon. And the last is a very small installation that recently happened and is currently still in Venice. All of these, again, it's a similar theme. How can we change people's perspectives of where they are? How can we ask people, please slow down, look closer, realize that what you have is beautiful and worth protecting, and start to think yourselves on how to do that. Because ultimately, no building is going to save the world. Unfortunately, no landscape probably will either. People will at this point, because we're the ones that are fucking it up. So this is the Opera House. This is probably the project we're best known for. It was built, and this is actually, people don't necessarily know, this was built on a very industrial landscape. The history of Oslo is actually similar to a lot of the histories of the cities we've been talking about. It grew up over time. The land was built, and it was built for industry, not for people. And it kept getting built up. And as it got built up, and as more and more industry and transportation and sort of dirty uses came up to it, the waterfront was separated from the city. It was forgotten, and it became polluted. And the project actually looked to do something that we've, again, looked at in numerous contexts. The city was separated by a large highway from the waterfront, and there was not public space, ample public space along the waterfront. It was all industrial. And the project looked to reconnect over that highway and across to the civic spaces of Oslo by creating a new public plaza. If you look at this program diagram, the theaters of the Opera House actually do not take up most of the space of the site. Most of it is taken up by public plazas and public libraries, and the public plaza is tilted, which is sort of weird. It's a beacon from far away to go to the water. It's a low horizontal building, so it is not a tall obelisk-like beacon of the past. It is a very different kind of beacon. But people do go, and it does interact with the water, and it does allow you to touch the water. And in order to build on this industrial waterfront, a lot of contaminants had to be taken out of the harbor. So this area specifically was highly, highly contaminated. There was a lot of dredging that had to happen. Contaminated soils had to be moved elsewhere. And that process started a ripple effect of other waterfront industrial sites around this harbor starting to do the same thing. So I want to say that it was not the intention of the Oslo Opera House to clean the harbor. It really was not designed to do that, but it did. If you bring people to the water, they want to go swimming. If they can't go swimming, they will get together and figure out how to make a place that they can go swimming. And they did here. So people started to use this in a very different way. People are now swimming in the harbor, and it's used as recreation. And it's also promoted, of course, biodiversity under the water. The surface of the opera plazas is very crenellated, and many things have started to take root or grow there, and more people are going. So the attendance is up massively. More people getting together in a public space equals more conversation, more unexpected interaction, and more solutions being thought of, because it might not happen from this room. Like this. This is a massive conference on climate resiliency that happened in 2013 that was hosted on, I'm joking, it's actually a Justin Bieber concert, but there was 15,000 people that occupied the roofs all the way down in towards the harbor, and often there's more people outside than inside of this building. Yeah, and so that's the Oslo Opera House. At a very different scale, and back in America, we worked probably 10 years, 7, 8 years ago on Willamette Falls. It's an ongoing project. It's not been built yet. This, again, is an industrial site. As you can see, it's super cool, but it is not accessible. It's not a place people can go, even though it's a very beautiful waterfront. And you know, this is what it looked like, and I think to designers, this is sort of kind of like wonderful, sexy images of things rusting, but most people don't like this. So what can you do to bring people to this place and sort of say, hey, it actually could be beautiful, and maybe it already is, you just aren't looking close enough. And we, of course, had to engage the community, which has a history there. The river is a vibrant place for commerce, but also for several sort of endangered species. You see an eel right there that we're trying to get back to the river. And we had certain values that we tried to bring to this waterfront, this river walk. The task was to create a walk along the river and allow people access to this place, but safe access, because it's not clearly a safe place in and of itself. So we had to look really carefully at all the people and all the creatures who use this place now. There was a very, very, very important engagement process with the several native tribes in that area that is ongoing. The project, like I said, has not happened yet, as well as the plant and animal life and the things that are happening in the river. Understanding that these people and other creatures occupy this site in a sort of cyclical way and different ways in different seasons, and trying to understand that over the course of a calendar year and over the course of time. There is totally a missing. Oh no, there it is. And we are also trying to push the city to not imagine this as a street, a river walk, and a river, but as something that's intermingled. So the existing buildings become relics that you can explore or occupy in different ways, and the river walk is not a linear thing, it's a network, both in plan and in section. And when we reach out to communities, we often listen, sometimes more literally than others. This is an incredibly literal listening to the community. A young person drew this picture, and we also drew this picture. And so you can get really wonderful ideas when you invite a cross-section of the community, including the youth, to imagine, because actually some of us older people are not as good at imagining futures. So a place like this might look derelict to an adult, but it looks like a playground to a young person, and actually could be a playground in the future. And I'm going to go fairly quickly because we're running late. I blame the Italians. But there were values like narration, immersion, and how to reintroduce new narratives to this site that have been lost over time, and which ones to reintroduce and which ones maybe are best forgotten. And you can see the river walk sort of extending across the way. The buildings were still there. Some of them are occupied, some of them are not. And we sort of really changed this and linked them all together, the series of walkways and spaces, and introduced some ecological zones where the edge is no longer hard, but is allowed to be soft, floodable, and create habitat. Again, the public spaces in these sort of old industrial buildings, they lend themselves to appropriate, to public spaces that are non-prescriptive, that people can appropriate, that they can use in different ways. So don't tell people what to do, let them do what they want. And you get a more ecological section through this space. And that brings me back to the ECC. You saw some of this morning. Why we were invited here is because we were just in Venice with the ECC. And we proposed an installation, installed it, that is very similar to some of the larger projects that we talked about, in that it's trying to call attention to this Alexander von Humboldt, which who really tried a long time ago, 250 years plus ago, tried to bring people's imaginations into the idea that we are actually part of an interconnected web. And this, before ecosystems was a term, but he was describing ecosystems and extending that to include the ground and the water and the air that we breathe. And as we all know, and we've seen in Venice, just like in New Orleans, ground is not given. It is not something that we can take for granted. And we wanted to find a subtle way to call attention to that fact, that especially in a place as precarious as Venice or New Orleans, we don't know what the ground looks like. And actually some of the more profound things that are happening underground and out of sight. Our installation was in a garden. It is a small seating element in a grove of trees. We looked very closely at the context on Google Maps, since we weren't there. And there's a gorgeous grove of these stone pines that we found very inspiring. We wanted to be sort of in the middle of the grove and allow people to see their relationship to the trees, their relationship to the water, and have a sort of a playful intervention that invited people to share in a joyful experience that also got them thinking differently about the ground that they're occupying. I think we're the only team that actually followed the brief and didn't actually make giant foundations. Our project came together in 2 hours, which was really fun in the rain. It drew inspiration from joinery and woodworking in Venice. We worked with a local fabricator in Italy to have it made and shipped to the site, and we put it together, like I said, very quickly. And people used it, and they're still using it today. And some people used it as a play feature, and maybe they didn't think all that much about what it meant. Other people really did, and this actually is a conference on climate resiliency and sustainability, and these people are listening to a talk about exactly what I'm talking about. And they're occupying it, and it didn't break, which was great. And throughout the course of a weekend, we got to see people occupy this in many different ways. And I imagine that there were many good conversations that were had around this bench. We did not tell people how to sit on it. They did many different unexpected things. I really enjoy that it was one of the only benches in the garden, so everyone seemed to think it was the best cocktail table also. But then it's got 5 legs. If there's 5 people on it and one person stands up, the other ones spill their drink, which was really great. So that jostles them out of whatever conversation they were having and makes them think about the fact that they're actually not balanced. Young people used it. And like I said, people used it in incredibly unexpected ways and really allowed themselves to change their perspective on the landscape that they were occupying. I think that this jostling out of what we sort of take for granted, like the ground and the water, is a way to catalyze a conversation, which is much like what we're doing here. You can do that with design. You can do that with non-prescriptive, playful design. You can invite people to the table to share in a joyful experience, but also potentially a profound one. And you don't know what will come out of that, and that's actually, I think, okay. Thank you.
All right. right. So I have a question. I have two questions. Perhaps I'll pose them both so folks, if one resonates more than the other, can jump in, and that way we'll have some time for audience Q&A. But thank you all for really powerful presentations, important work. Thanks to our folks that are in Bangladesh. And I suppose my first question is, does anyone have any particular lessons learned about the way that you engaged with the community, engaged with partners? We heard a lot of thoughtfulness about ensuring representation, humanizing data, for example. We were cautioned with the tendency for white saviorism. So how do you, maybe if anyone wants to jump in on tackling that a little bit more in depth in terms of how you approach that, or if you have some good lessons for us to carry forward. My second thought, and Kurt, you kind of hit on it a little bit in terms of, is there a conversation about what the limits of design are in terms of addressing these questions of justice at different scales? And so those are the two that I pose. So for whoever wants to jump in on either.
I think this goes to something that Coleman said, and when I showed the students who went to the lower Ninth Ward, and I didn't want to talk about some of the other schools, but I saw this, that they came on buses, they went there, they saw the place in the bus, and then they came back, and Tulane gave them a room so they could do a workshop, and then they did some houses, and they got exhibited, and I was proud that the students wanted to get out of the car, they wanted to walk, they wanted to engage with the people. The drawings were done in a dining table with the community members, and there were no models and no exhibition and none of that. There was no solution that appeared on a helicopter and dropped down because we're better than you, or we're, they actually came out of that process with a life lesson of sitting down in a very humble way and listening to people and listen to, this is how we have lived, this is how we would like to live, this is what we do not want to see, this is what we do not want somebody doing to our community, and now let's sit down and talk about it. And that to me was a very profound lesson that probably for them, for all of us, was a lifelong lesson.
I guess one thing that I was thinking about with all of the presentations, so maybe answering it, but is that a lesson to learn is to flip the narrative of how we usually think about things. So I kind of loved how you flipped the way people sit, or flip the ground, but try to, like in my project, like flipping data to use it to have a voice, right? Data is usually used by the powerful, allow voice come up, but kind of, I think as we work with communities that don't always have a voice, how do we flip that situation and create opportunities for those voices to be heard and shift the ground?
Hello? Is it on? No, do you want this one? Hello? Yeah. One of the things that I think that I've experienced and that I've seen through schools as well is that, and it was talked about as far as the sense of you sort of get tired of being adaptive to change that you can't control. So, for example, just through like the public school system, and I know why we have hip hop and rap right now, because they took the musics. When I was in school, you actually had to play a musical instrument, so you had choices, and you began to it was a different type of environment. So when those things get taken out of the school system, or when certain activities get taken out of the school system, you have to, adapt. And so I think what happens is that, we begin to become, I'm just talking about those that are considered minorities or others in a minority culture, that adaptive context, you get exhausted. It's like, okay, this is never going to change. How are we going to change? And that's why, sort of talking about this sense of until we begin to see, others begin to see us as them, I don't think the change is going to happen so soon. I've, sort of crossed my fingers hoping that things will happen. But, and I didn't mean to really talk about architecture firms as not being representative. I'm actually saying from early stages of our education, the fact that, we don't have the resources early on, things that are being taken away from us. We're so affected by everything. Health, we're dying earlier, all types of events are happening, that it represents our economy and our businesses. And so, for example, if firms were more diverse, I think that we'd have a different conversation as well. We have different projects that are being presented. We'll be meeting the public where they are in a sense of having a voice. So they oftentimes, like just as an example, did a project in Harlem when it was being gentrified. And one of the things that happened, I remember the Disney store moved in. And when the Disney store moved in, the public didn't know they were coming, and they moved in. The Disney did not allow any of the street merchants to sell their wear, which was sort of a highlight of Harlem. It was like one of the reasons you go, because it has a street life, as in Jane Jacobs, she talks about, the street life, and that was the life, and then it gets killed. And so it changes the whole environment. But if we had more diverse voices when those things have happened in the process of design, in the process of making, I think that, again, we would see different projects and different people begin to come together. So I'm just saying it affects everything that we do. It affects, it affects everyone, not even just the minority, but also the majority.
Yeah, adding to that, and this was a recent experience, and how it's important to visit the site, but also to just, in Puerto Rico, people are like very nosy. So it's like, they want to know what's happening, and they go to you and they go like, hey, so what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, well, we're just looking at a site because we're planning to propose. And also, you need to just be open, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, I was thinking, why don't you come in? And that's when they invite you, but you have to be open to that. And last semester, I collaborated in the end with a colleague who was doing a studio in Vieques, which is part of the archipelago of Puerto Rico. And Vieques has many challenges. And when the students presented before going to Vieques in midterm their projects, there was a bit of it was known that they didn't see the site and they didn't really see Puerto Rico or Vieques, which is very different from San Juan and from other areas that you can study. And when they went to Vieques and they lived it and they asked people who lived there, and they actually went to the supermarket and saw that there was a food shortage, or some things that were considered very bad, they were actually not so bad. And then that could be opportunities for kind of starting and creating a better master plan or a better proposal. When they presented it in the final review, and we had activists from Vieques, who is also an architect, come in and kind of see the work, it was beautiful because all the work aligned. And so there was a transformation, and visiting the site and engaging with the community is very important, because it was like 180 degrees of results. And then at the end, it was just a great conversation and a great proposals that really did see the future and also really respected what the community wanted and needed. So engaging and just being open, but also, just going also to the houses inside of them. So that's, I think, one of the lessons that could be learned on how to tackle that. Yeah, we're very nosy.
I'll chime in. I do think there are huge limitations to what we can do as designers. I think that we have the power, the skills, and the education to fix the problems that we created in the built environment, and I think we're starting to do that. But that's maybe a first step in solving some of the problems that have been talked about over the course of the next few days, or the last today and yesterday. I think we have the ability to reconnect people to places. We have the ability to provide platforms for people to engage in cities and engage each other, but we can't force anyone to do that. So I actually really appreciate the diversity of people and disciplines that was brought to this conference, because I think that it's this kind of group where there are planners, city workers, researchers like yourself, who are sort of resituating data and actually allowing people to access it in a different way, and resituating and telling narratives that might not be told otherwise. I think the best that I feel that I can do is allow you a platform to better engage the community, because we have created over the course of architectural history a lot of broken spaces that have actually resulted in a lot of the inequity that we see in our cities. And we can repair that from a spatial standpoint. We cannot alone repair the social damage that was created by those spaces.
For the folks online, is there anything you'd like to add in terms of?
Yeah, right. Thank you. So for us in the camps, for the community engagement, we try to engage the community in all phases, beginning with the identification of the problems and also in monitoring, which is the kind of participatory monitoring, but still there are some limitations. Some of the factors which are extraneous to the projects, like the, hugely dense area, scarcity of land, even for some of the design which requires some land, it was completely difficult. And that is one thing. And when we talk about community engagement, and I believe that within the camp situation, it is different than in other area, because here, refugees are 100% dependent on whatever, humanitarian agencies are providing. And also many, in Bangladesh, they don't have the access to livelihoods. So in terms of, what should I say? Also, they're here for short period of time. They don't have the previous memory of the region or of the area, though some host community people are there. So that we actually considered in terms of engaging with the community. And for longer term sustainability, so within the humanitarian situation or humanitarian response, it is a bit, what should I say, difficult to think about the longer term sustainability. So for our case, we mainly identified some no regret solutions mostly, and that's what we are compelled to identify those, rather than some actions which later needs to be evaluated, but it may happen that by that time no communities are there. So these are the challenges that we faced, and we tried to address by this way. Thank you. And Sultan, if you want to add anything, please feel free.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, that we also follow do no harm policy, which sometimes we have some ideas, very good ideas, and something good in our mind, but that might create some problem for the refugees living there. So considering that we sometimes cannot implement some of those good ideas, considering this principle. Beside that, I just want to share another experience from my other projects. So if we are being able to understand the importance of these projects, for example, we have implemented some road projects inside the camp. To implement that, they had to relocate in other areas. So it was difficult because, as you mentioned, land is so precious in this camp, and they already have a community, and relocating somewhere else is that means they're leaving their relatives or known areas. So therefore, when they understand the importance of that road, they either adjust inside the community or they relocate it from both sides of the road, leaving 1 or 2 meters what is required for the road, and they reduce their shelter size. That's how they were contributing in the community when they understand the importance of the road. So therefore, sometimes it's okay, but sometimes it's difficult to get their endorsement in implementing in such situation. Over.
Actually, I wanted to just add, I was very fascinated by the presentation from Bangladesh. I really appreciated the level of analysis of the topography and the landscape itself, but then the unexpected part for me, because the analysis part obviously was a necessity. You can't have people building on slopes that are unstable or places that are going to flood. So that's great. You're finding places in the landscape where a camp could grow. The unexpected part for me was the walkway, and how much thought was put into the inclusion of public space. Because to me, the walkway was a clear public space project. It was the street, and I saw several I don't know what they look like on the ground, but they look like plazas and plan. So, you know, I found that network in making sure that even in a time of great need and one where there's no time to actually go through a full planning process, that the inclusion of public space and sort of the revamping or actually the upkeep of that public space, the maintenance of it, was really thought out and thoughtful in the project. So I really appreciated that.
Thank you. I suppose we'll open it up to the audience, make sure everyone has a chance to ask questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, it's me again. One of the things that I thought was pretty important that all of you all addressed was the idea of engagement and asking, you know, the people are thinking about architecture and design in the way that is different, and also trying to fix the amount of brokenness that has been created over the years. And I would ask all of you, if at all possible, and you may not have an answer, but do you see if you do see a clear path forward, do you see major areas of opportunity in looking at climate change in the last day and a half, of places that you think that we could impact better or more, that not just about coastal regions, but just about, you know, I constantly keep thinking of what I call migration cities, or what are we going to do for the new urban planning? That is and so I just wanted to ask if any of you all have actually sat down with the rest of your cohorts and said, okay, what are we going to do? What is the positivity that we can get out of this to fundamentally break through? And I'm also really interested in the data, right? As how can you manifest a design that everyone can say, okay, this is a way, and then how can I help support it through that data?
I'll provide the academic angle to that because I've always worked in a public university, which are big, slow, and bureaucratic, and still obsessed with teaching in the way that most were taught in the 20th century, and trying to replicate that in the 21st century in a moment where things are moving faster than our own ability to digest it. And things are happening not because of us, like many times in the 20th century, because of universities, but in spite of our best intentions. And a lot of the research is taking place in private think tanks, private firms like we've seen here do wonderful research. And universities, which are usually led by people who are about to retire, or people who don't want, you know, a lot of universities don't want things to change, or don't mess things while I'm here. it's a moment where we need to sit down and talk about relevance, and how do we remain relevant and not become spectators of what's happening somewhere else. So not just talking about the big challenges in society, whether we're tackling them or not, is how do we become relevant in that conversation, or how do we lead that conversation? I'll leave it there for the next. Well, Ari will talk about this in Venice.
If I can, I just want to say, I think, and I'm also going to take the sort of academic route because I've been teaching for a long time. And one of the things that I think is really critical, and just talking from the sort of design aspect, is that I think we have to actually decolonize our educational process so that we are not learning the same sort of Western constructs of understanding how we begin to proceed, because the power needs to be shifted, the power needs to be shared. As far as how we begin to train our students to begin to think. So for example, the Native American or peoples of the First Nation in Canada, they've dealt with these, the fields, the fires for ages. And they can speak to ways to begin to protect some of the land that's burning, And so I think what I mean is that understanding the sort of crossover and the pollination of what, every culture has to give, I think, is one of the ways to move forward in that. But I do think we have to take a bold step and say, maybe we need to turn the teaching construct, upside down, and shake it up a bit so that we understand that where the power structures have been, and begin to share that mode so we move forward and have a more diverse approach, I think, moving forward. So that would be my response to that.
I think it's such an interesting question, because you're like, which place should we go, or where do we need to be? And I'm like, everywhere, right? Like, this is, climate change is obviously an issue that the world faces, and every city is impacted it from one way or another. So I think it's more a question of what tools do we use to help explain that. And I would say that we should all be using our own superpowers to address these very important issues. And I just saw some amazing superpowers today. I mean, my superpower is data, and I really like to think about ways of flipping, turning around, making people understand data that's typically used by the powerful, and kind of allowing it to give voice to those who are typically don't have that kind of power. And so that's why I was talking about like let's think about how we can flip the narrative. I think that cities will and have to understand they are going to be receiving a huge amount of migrants, and we absolutely, as architects, urban planners, need to use our superpower to think about that impending housing crisis, along with how do we design with the land, right? It's an kind of impending growth of migrants coming to cities all over the world, but also thinking about in that new reality, how do we begin to create a new landscape that kind of works with it? And this is something I'm thinking about in New York. I mean, we have, in New York City right now, I mean, there are so many migrants coming every day, and our answer is like reopening jails, putting them in a field, in a formal airport, and we should all be, I mean, this is like my next interest. This is where I'm going next. Is my next interest is really like, how do we think about this? Because it's not going away. I mean, Eric Adams in New York, I just saw him, he was on a flight to Mexico, Colombia, on it was a tour it was called a discouragement tour. Right, to discourage migration. Anyways, that's not the answer. The reality is that we have to understand that reality and then work with it and build a city that's will take in, because actually this is a human reality, as like kind of old as we are existing, the kind of pathway and movement of people is part of that. So let's all use our superpowers.
I'll just add, I mean, I think you just touched on it, but you know, as a landscape architect, the thought that people have to leave places because of climate change is slightly problematic to me. I mean, I know it is to everyone here because we've talked a lot about the importance and the beauty of specific places and communities and cultures that grow up there. I think part of the problem that we've had is that I think we've seen it. We're fighting landscape processes and natural processes. We talk about fires and floods like they're disasters, but they're actually realities of any living landscape. The vast majority of the forests in North America are supposed to burn. All of the prairies are supposed to burn. I really appreciated Margarita Jover's presentation this morning. I've heard her speak about Zaragoza Water Park before, but she's the only person that's talked about flooding as regenerative. Sediment is important to some stream systems, and the ability for sediment to be disposed onto the land and start to add nutrients to the soil will help that become a more resilient landscape. And so I would hope as we move forward and everything's going to have to change, we think about being adaptive, but also and a great way to learn about these is to tap into indigenous knowledge. Indigenous peoples, especially in this continent, have been living with the landscape for a long time. Some of them are migrant populations because they're following landscape processes. They're following the weather, they're following the bison, and they're lighting fires as they're going so that when they come back, that prairie will be greener than it was when they left. So I do think, even if we do start talking about moving communities, maybe there's a way to move them and move them back, or maybe there's a way to rethink how we're occupying a landscape that allows people to create new cultures and build on the ones that already have been resilient, not because they've been forced to be resilient, but because they live in close contact with the places that they occupy.
Yeah, just to add, I think that it's also the way that we start, right, let's say with all of this, the forum that has been great with all the ideas, and I think I agree, like let's use our superpowers and let's get all together, but also let's rethink that the way of design should be more community driven, and I think this panel has been all about that. Because it starts to change the way we think, and I think doing that, maybe just understanding maybe the vernacular or what is there and what has maybe worked for millions of years, why, not millions, but let's say thousands of years, why just discard it and try to get with the new tech and then look for that. We can go back and go to the roots of it, understand it, and how do we apply it to this new future that I think, saying that something's sustainable and resilient should not be said anymore as words that attract, but it should be embedded into your design, and it should be something that you don't talk about. It's like when you see it, when you see how it connects with the community, with all the projects that we've seen today, and how it gives back, and gives back to nature and to the world and climate, it's present and it's observed. So that's what I can add.
Right. I have one question. I'm not sure if someone else from the audience would like to intervene as well. But my question goes to Simone, which is, I know the moderator should be the one asking questions, but I'm very curious. So everyone else that intervened I do resonate with everyone's intervention, right? Because I come from architecture and urban planning as well, and I see where the necessity of design. So my question goes to you as a social scientist. What do you think is the way forward? How are you educating the next generation of students here at Tulane to think in the proper way for the way forward in the realms of environmental justice and climate change? So that question goes back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I definitely don't presume to have all of the answers like many social scientists, and perhaps sometimes as researchers we are a little too cautious in making certain statements. Some of my past research, social scientists such as myself, that are trained in a kind of qualitative ethnographic methodologies, we are a little bit more comfortable saying that recognizing our standpoint, our viewpoint, the conceptual frameworks, theoretical frameworks that we bring to the work. So having a social justice orientation is not something I shy away from, but there are folks too in academia that very much see their role as an information producer and maybe are more hesitant for a number of reasons to engage in certain social issues. So there's a lot there, but I did resonate with kind of the concept of thinking really critically about power structures in the context in which we're embedded. As social scientists too, we're thinking a lot about the larger systems, the economic systems, governance systems, political systems, and how they manifest in or manifest inequities and injustice. But we have a lot to learn and be in dialogue across disciplines and across sectors, and looking more into this idea of co-production, really working with people as equals to produce relevant knowledge. These are all things that I think are part of the solution, but I think there's also kind of policy solutions too that are necessary, but it all comes back to many political problems, and that's where I see also design as disruptor, data as power, some of these troubling the environment, troubling our perspectives. These are areas that I think are just disrupt the power, entrenched power, and so that's something that I think we as social scientists and academics need to kind of learn from other areas and learn to think about what can come with future visioning and presenting alternatives of the future that are more positive or just inclusive, because I think there's power in communicating that vision as well. So that was a little all over the place, but
No worries in the back. Okay, so I just kind of want to ask briefly, although this is maybe a little bit more of a contradictory kind of question. So if we understand justice as a framework for potentially empowering dispossessed or disenfranchised communities, what are we doing as architects and designers kind of facing this contradiction, especially when we're working with potential clients, developers, for example, who might be standing in odds with the communities that they either purport to serve or are working in?
Okay, I think my first thing that comes to my mind. So we've actually had this sort of situation working with, when I used to teach at the University of Michigan, and at that time we took students into Flint, Michigan, which many of you may be familiar with the water issues that have happened in Flint as well. But we did have an opportunity before the water incident to work with, this is about 7 developers in the area that wanted to make a change. They wanted to determine how they could actually assist with the development and the blight, at least that was happening in Flint at that time. And part of the we had conversations with them as well, and one of the things, they were saying as well, they need to be at the table. Everyone needs to be at the table that's involved, from the contractors to the the people, all the stakeholders, the community as well. At some point, they need to be involved with the decisions on how things are going to move forward. And when we worked with them, we weren't designing anything. It was an exhibit that we put through all the blighted buildings in the area. So it became this sort of a museum walkway of solutions that students came up with in these blighted regions. So I don't know if anything actually came of that, but what did come of it was a discussion with the developers that we found to be actually a lot of them were much more sensitive than we actually thought that they would be. But they were honest about the connections politically that they had. And then there were some that were the more stubborn or stoic, sort of keeping their positions and maintaining their power situations. But I think, again, the only thing that I can really think of at this point in time is really sharing and understanding that everyone involved with the process needs to be at the table at some point to have a say and be seen as if, again, as you're speaking to your equals and breaking those power structures down. We're in a capitalist society, so that it makes it very difficult. But at the same time, I think that's what we need to do.
Yeah, I think this is a really good point. I do a lot of work in Kenya, and unfortunately, the government does not have the best interests of the people in play. But in almost all of the projects, we are always inviting all of the stakeholders to the table, because there are many. We invite the government, we invite the corrupt kind of informal actors, we invite the public, we invite the architect, and we all are at the table together. And I think that's we're often ignoring. I mean, I guess, you have to address it head on. Oftentimes the government is just giving us lip service, and of course the corrupt actors are also doing their own thing. But I think the transparency and trust that is created through those conversations really has taken almost all of our projects a really long way. That we feel comfortable. Just the fact that we feel comfortable bringing them all together changes the way people think about the project. And I have one project that we worked on in Kenya where the government was largely disinterested the whole time, not helpful at all, against our interests. And then when they saw what we did, they actually labeled it as their project, and they're we did this amazing project. And I think that's fine. I think that's exactly what we want in a way, because we want those projects to proliferate. We don't want the government to oppose them. We want these beneficial things to happen. And so sometimes it's bringing everybody to the table to create that trust that allows that to happen. I was oh, this is a huge success. They said it was theirs. And you have to not worry about your brand name or your brand in there, because if your brand has brought it together for them to still, obviously you have to protect yourself. But I'm not saying get run over, but I think that created a certain kind of trust with us and the government that's lasted for years and years since I did that initial project with them, and continue to work that way.
I used to work for an architect who's no longer with us, who was convinced about the city as an urban life, as and the virtues of urban life and diversity as his North Star, and he declined to do projects that did not go in that direction. Even in times when we felt like the office needed work, he would decline it. my situation, even though I completely agree with, in principle, with what he wanted to do, I've been lucky enough that I've always had a salary from the university. So my practice, I really can choose what I want to do and what I don't want to do, and whether I want to do something right now or don't want to do something right now, which is a privilege that I have. Do I do that? Yeah, I choose the projects that I want to be involved with. I have a very limited time, and I want to do things that make a difference, right? But I'm also conscious that not everybody is in that position, and I truly admire those who have a commitment and integrity to dedicate their lives into what they really believe.
All right, so thank you so much for this incredible presentation, to all the panelists and to Simone for moderating this. So I kindly invite you to join the audience while we close it up.
Yes, well, thank you so much, everyone. That has been very interesting. Thank you for all the interventions. We're not going to be keeping you very long for the drinks. We just have a few more things to speak about before we close our Shaping the City. So first, I'm very sorry to share that Liz Kamuti is not going to be able to join us today. Unfortunately, she's not feeling well, and she really apologizes for not being with us. So we are not going to be having that presentation. And I think the way forward has already been discussed. So thank you, Terry, for bringing that forward, bring that way forward in the question before. But we're going to speak again in a few minutes. Lucia.
So to close the program, we want to do it like as we started. So we want to bring all of us back to Venice, and to do that, to thank Nano team for bringing us to New Orleans. And like, this is your fault that we're all here together today, and this is Raquel's fault to invite you to participate in our exhibition. So while we invite you to join us on the stage, we are gonna watch a very short video about your experience in Venice. All right.
Sorry about that. I mean, in the meantime, we can be creative until our boys fix the technical difficulties. We can tell you what's going to happen in Shaping the City in Venice. Yes. So we are very happy. That's the 4th edition here. I think it went very well. Very interesting conversations, very interesting dialogues. The 5th edition is going to take place on the 24th and the 25th of November in Venice by the closing of Time, Space, Existence exhibition. And we are really excited about this edition. We have 4 themes that are going to be discussed, and all are inspired by Time, Space, Existence, so by the exhibit itself. The first theme is titled Emerging Pedagogies. So we are speaking about the future of architecture education in depth, and that is when we're going to have Francisco from University of Illinois moderating that panel with different deans of universities from all over just to see how we can shape architecture education and urban planning education for the future. So that is topic one. The second topic is displacements and migration. So that is also fueled by what's been exhibited in Venice by the Norman Foster Foundation and Sarah, who has exhibited all this beautiful work. So that is going to be session 2, migration, displacement of people in different contexts. The third theme is building sustainability, and that is the new techniques and new digital building technologies that are being brought forward in the construction industry. And that has been highlighted into different projects and different researches at the time-space existence. We have already confirmed some speakers who are coming from Stuttgart, from different research labs, from Germany, from Switzerland, and we're very excited about that panel as well. It's a recurring panel. We've had that also in Shaping the City 2021, and that's a very important topic to address: construction and materiality in construction architecture. And the final panel is titled Rebuilding Architecture, and that is a conversation between Kengo Kuma with Botond Bognar and Balázs Bognar, who is a partner of Kengo Kuma. Botond is a professor at the University of Illinois as well, focusing on Japanese architecture and the merge, let's say the connection between architecture and nature in particular. So that is in the pipeline, in the very short 2 months, less than 2 months, Shaping the City. But we are also aiming and we're hoping to have a few next editions in 2024 to be discussed and to be determined. So yeah, stay tuned. I invite you all to check the page. It's very easy, shapingthecity.org. Follow us on social media, do all of these kind of things, and please stay up to date.
Okay.
That is the video without sound.
I love you. I can send y'all the video if you want it. Okay.
As we sit on the precipice of a massive transformation that has to occur, we thought it was incredibly poignant to bring out the idea of resilience and climate change through New Orleans. We can analyze, we can provide guidance, and we can do sort of that forever change that needs to occur to start creating a better way of life, especially for the issues that we have around climate change. So when we started this and we started thinking of that fundamental shift of socioeconomic issues that we're dealing with hurricanes and with New Orleans and governmental and infrastructure, who can get out of the city during a hurricane, who can't, who can afford to live there anymore and who can't. What came to mind is who were the true inhabitants, and those are the Mardi Gras Indians. Culture keepers, that's who they are, and that's who we come from. New Orleans and Venice, they are so unique, but yet so similar in having to deal with the idea of rising tide, an older city, a city bounded by European culture, but forever begun with the native Venetians, who a lot of them have also been driven out of the city, whether it's tourism, whether it's rising tides. In New Orleans, we have the Mardi Gras Indians and our native culture that also are having issues with being able to sustain in New Orleans.
It sparked the idea that these can be bridging moments, that these can be moments that take advantage of all the work that's been done before us. The ideas of the infrastructure, the sustainability that's gradually taking foot, but moving a little too slow, especially as our world moves more quickly and is more fragile and is more variable. And our architecture and our designs have to be more responsive and more flexible and more usable at all times. The exhibit that we, the team, created, I think, has an element of whimsy and mysticism to it. And this is an opportunity for us to experiment to share ideas and hopefully get feedback from the community, to try to spread people's imagination on what is possible. What does it mean to be submerged? What does it mean to be in the space between the known and the unknown? That liminal foggy moment. And there's moments of that fuzz and haze as we look to the future with glimmers of opportunity and edges. We spend so much of our time trying to solve the everyday problems and sometimes forget about the big picture that surrounds us.
If you abstract a space or you abstract an idea enough, there are certain categories, almost like platforms, that can then start to siphon up and sort of release that fog, if you will. So people can talk about this in the governmental idea. They can talk about it in the architectural idea, in the urban planning ideas. What does being submerged mean? And what is it going to do to help others? In a certain level, we are storytellers. And one of the things that came out of starting this idea is that we found out that our stories as the architect or as Nano was not as important as the stories of the people and the place that we represent. That's the truth.
Hopefully at the end you come to a conclusion where everybody finds a new idea or a new understanding or a new revelation. These branches of ideas are spreading, but then intertwining and overlapping, and we're making networks. And the ideas are being distributed, and nodes are being created, and reconnections are being made. It's a neural network. It's a physical network. It's a social network. Hopefully it becomes an economic network and maybe a governance network.
If you can take an idea and abstract it to be interpretive and individually interpretive to anyone, then you have succeeded in doing something far greater than architecture. You have succeeded in making someone feel and feel the liminal in this exhibition. I want to feel.
For powering through this. I've learned so much in the last day and a half, and I've made such great friends across the pond. And I cannot wait to have a shot with all of you. That's alcoholic shot, Francesca, Frederica. So, but moreover, I want to tell you how honored and humbled I am that all of you came and shared your knowledge and your experience and your guidance, and I applaud all of you, and I'm enthralled by the majority of you. I'm going to stalk you. And I wanted to just say thank you, and I want to say thank you to the ECC team for even your mere existence it's beautiful. And I'm not going to cry. I'm just going to pass this microphone on.
Obviously, I have to agree with Terry and say thank you so much for ECC. It's been an incredible ride. It's been an incredible learning opportunity. The last 2 days, the last 2 years have reawakened a series of passions of mine that had sort of gotten buried in the humdrum of every day. And I think one of the best things that came out of today was we can all be superhuman. We all have incredible powers and individual talents, and that all of those talents are going to be required to solve the problems that we face. And that the strongest thing I heard was the end was, it is about we, not they, and about buy-in from everyone. So thank you all for joining us, and let's go have a shot.
Thank you. And thanks to our team, Nano team and ECC team, everybody that's sitting there at the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So to end the conference, we want to thank the entire ECC team. I'm not going to list everyone because I'm going to surely miss someone and regret it. And I want to thank Nano team again, and see you in Venice. But I also have to thank our partners, not only Nano, but also New Orleans and Company, the AIA, and our sponsors, Bentley and AOS for supporting us, as well as our media partners, which are Domus, ArcDaily, and World Architects. So again, thank you so much. See you in Venice. Thank you for enriching our platform and to teaching us so many things and inspire us in these 2 past days. Thank you.